Are back for week 6 of NPA. I am here with Cedric. How's it going? How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Excited to see some awesome matches today. I haven't been tracking NPA too closely as much as I did in recent years, but definitely have some exciting players on the broadcast here from both some of the teams that are in the top four of the overall ranking boards, and then some who are just struggling along trying to get some big wins and get back in the running for the championship.
Yeah, I mean, definitely looking forward to it. We have as you said, right? We have a bunch of great games, ahead of us. So, and we also have a cool way that now we can show you guys a, open team sheet preview, which will be great. So we can obviously kind of have a bit of discussion around the teams and, what we'll be looking at. But let's get right into looking at the matchup between our first two players here. So we're going to be having a match between Hobbit and I believe it's Kunki as well, so it'll be a pretty good match. It'll be between the Puppies and the Celestic Stars, I think, I believe. So we have a two. I mean, I think the top team's a little bit less standard, but it's still something that we've seen around, right? Like Cali Ice with Ogre Pawn and Cornerstone isn't something that's particularly new. It's been around, for a while, especially paired with that Landorus, which has been really popular recently next to Calyrex teams. I'd say the most interesting part is the Terra Poison on the Calyrex, but what are you thinking about this matchup?
Yeah, when I look at these teams, there's obviously something that resembles pretty closely the Arabega 6 of Miraidon, outside of the Urshifu being a single strike variant, outside as opposed to the Rapid Strike that's more common these days. I think typically on these Calyrex Ice teams, when there's a Landorus present, it can do well versus the Miraidons. However, it typically needs some form of speed control to still not just get Draco Meteored or even Dazzling Gleamed if you don't have a resisting Terra to get close to a knockout. So I think one of the struggles for Hobbit is going to be protecting that Landorus so that it can deal with the Iron Hands, Miraidon, and the rest of the six from Kunki. And then, yeah, on Kunki's side, just making sure that you can get around the redirection from the Ogre Pawn, which will probably be trying to protect the Landorus, and just, once Trick Room gets up, just trying to deal with, um, you know, protecting your Pokemon using your Speed Sandwich of the Miraidon, the Farigiraf, and the Iron Hands to be able to sweep your opponent in or out of Trick Room.
Yeah, I think it is worth noting too the Terra Water and the Iron Hands as well. Typically, we've seen Bug more frequently, although now they've started going towards Water a bit more. Water is really good for being able to resist the Surging Strikes from the Urshifu, Glacial Lance from the Calyrex Ice, and being neutral towards both Landorus stabs. So I think all of those factors will be really useful. You have to be a little bit careful with using Terra Water in front of Ogerpon, but if you're able to get rid of Ogerpon, I think the Terra Water definitely has a lot of utility here, especially combined with the fact that it's going to be able to throw out low kicks to do a lot of damage. That being said, though, because the Calyrex is that Terra Poison, if Terra Poison comes out, Iron Hands will kind of get hard walled by the Calyrex. So, you have to make sure you're being careful to put yourself in a position where you're still able to break through the Calyrex and maybe not lose your Miraidon too early.
Yeah, agreed. I think getting into Trick Room, like you said, because of the Terra Poison is a little bit safer of an option as opposed to if it was a more neutral Terra into Iron Hands. The ability to resist the low kick. Typically, if you have the Electric Terrain active, you have Helping Hand on the board from the Farigiraf. Low kick does up to like around 80% of the Calyrex, which you can't really afford to be taking. Having the option to have that effectively with the Terra Poison, and you're still taking a lot from Psychic. They can double you for a fair bit of damage, but at least not having to take the low kick anytime that Iron Hands is on the field means you can go into Trick Room a little bit more safely, especially when you have Landorus, Calyrex on the field. I think that's definitely what Hobbit is going to be trying to drive towards in most of the games.
Absolutely. With that being said, let's actually start getting into the game here so maybe we could see what both players opted to go towards. We're going to obviously see in the team preview here kind of what you had discussed, right? There's like definitely a couple of different ways that this match can be approached. I do want to say that like I feel like from the Arubega side of things, right? Like you're typically always going to be leaning into that Miraidon and for draft in a matchup like this, right? Like you want to be able to have that priority blocking of the fake out. You also want to be able to obviously just have that Terra Water draft with Electric Seed as an option. And I feel like the main question will be what are the other Pokemon you want besides that, right? And the Urshifu obviously being a really strong option here to be able to pressure the Calyrex with Wicked Blow, especially with the fact that it's not running something like Terra Fairy, so it can't resist Wicked Blow. So that's obviously really nice. And then from Hobbit side, right, it's going to be how do you address the early Miraidon that you know is going to be in the lead, right? Do you want to go for Ogre, Pond, and Landorus? And are you comfortable taking a Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam? would you rather go with a route where maybe you can pressure a bit differently, right? Like maybe you can lead Incineroar. That's going to be really interesting to see here.
Yeah, I think the training on the Landorus could be pretty key here as well. The Urshifus on this team, especially the Focus Sash, are generally going to be adamant max speed, but a lot of the Landorus in recent times on the Calyrex teams run a bit slower, a bit bulkier, so I'm interested to see the speed interaction between the Urshifu and the Landorus. That could definitely sway this lead pretty substantially if we do see it led, which we do. We see the Landorus Incarnate paired with the Calyrex Ice on Hobbit side next to the Urshifu Single Strike and the Miraidon. Both of the teams, one of the, some of the strongest offensive pieces being led immediately from both players.
I think this is a very tricky situation for Hobbit on turn one, to be honest. Like, yes, do you have ways to pressure both different outcomes 100%, but Volt Switch Wicked Blow is a really like safe play into the Calyrex. And you could theoretically also, if you think Calyrex is going to go for something like a Protect to try and catch a Volt Switch in a Terra Poison, you could always go for something like Draco Meteor into the Lando as well. I think honestly here, there's so many different options for both players. And I think honestly, Kunki's probably in the driving seat a little bit more. That being said, there are some potential ways a turn can go right for Hobbit. It just feels like the margins are a bit slimmer for Hobbit, where Hobbit has to get it like exactly right, whereas like Kunki has a lot more pressure on turn one.
Yeah, Kunki taking it pretty aggressively. I believe not terastallizing the Miraidon, yeah. So if the Calyrex ends up going for Protect and the Landorus just goes for a Sandseer or an Earth Power into the Miraidon, it will go down immediately. We see a terastallization from the Calyrex, but the Volt Switch does hit into the Calyrex. We're going to see that do things like 65% to it, and then a Wicked Blow we saw will be following up into that Calyrex, so most likely going to be going down here, and we see that it's Iron Hands and Farigiraf in the back. Generally, these are the most common for, especially when you have a Pelipper on a Calyrex team. The Ogre Pawn doesn't come as often. But yeah, the Farigiraf with the Electric Seed comboing for a defense boost really bolsters its defenses against the Calyrex to where you're not taking much from Glacial Lances, but the Landorus didn't go for Protect here. It could be launching a Sandseer Storm, which will do a lot to both Pokemon if it does connect. Wicked Blow does come out.
Urshifu's faster as well. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, exactly. We see the speed interaction. The Landorus, if it was modest max speed, would have outsped a, also neutral nature Urshifu, so might be a bit bulkier on the Landorus, but we see no Sandseer and Earth Power into the Farigiraf doing very, very excellent damage. But yeah, seeing the speed interaction now, it would have been very nice to have knocked the Urshifu down to a Focus Sash for a potential Urshifu or Ogre Pawn to clean it up in the back. Now you're a bit under the scalpel with the Urshifu just able to break through Protects and deal a lot of damage, and because we know the Urshifu is faster, it will always get an attack off before the Landorus attacks, and yeah.
I mean, I think a big thing here too is that there is the pressure of helping hand a Wicked Blow into the Landorus as well, right? So knowing that the Landorus is going to be slower than the Urshifu means that like you're kind of a little bit pressured here, right? I'd say honestly, it probably would have been a better trade for Hobbit had there been a Sandseer coming out, kind of as you mentioned, right? Breaking the Sash to the Urshifu, getting for draft down super low, so then a second Sandseer could double wipe the board. I think that would be probably the best case scenario. Even then, you'd have Power Whip as well in the Urshifu. But there's a couple different options here. I think like you could also opt to just play a bit more defensively, and we're going to see the Detect come out here on the Urshifu. It makes a lot of sense, right? You're trying to kind of conserve it. Power Whip going into that Protect as well, probably with the follow-up Sands here, just to be able to get damage into both Giraffe and Urshifu. If it connects, I think it's actually pretty okay for Kunki. You're going to end up getting a free switch back into the Miraidon, which is kind of what you want. And then you're going to be able to kind of have a reset board where you're just able to, again, exert pressure with like attack plus follow-up attack, right? I think the fact that Kali Ice got taken down early too is like really significant here, mostly for the fact of like there's like one less Pokemon you have to worry about in the end game here, so you have a lot more tools to leverage.
Yeah, with the Calyrex going down, the Farigiraf's job is mostly nullified. It's mainly there to just reverse Trick Rooms and tank Glacial Lances, and once the Calyrex is down, it's not that useful at doing either. But yeah, now Miraidon comes in. Tempo is definitely on Kunki's side. Able to go for a Terra, Fairy, Dazzling Gleam. Probably with the bulk, or with the lack of speed, we can expect the Landers to be able to take that. But honestly, whether it's a Wicked Blow or a Sucker Punch, I didn't quite catch the turn. With the Urshifu outspeeding both and a Focus Sash, you're basically just guaranteeing either a ton of damage or, if not a knockout this turn from this really deadly offensive combination.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big thing too here, right, is that turn one was so impactful, right? Like, I mean, being able to get the Volt Switch down, being able to get the Wicked Blow on the Calyrex, right? Like, it just kind of set up Kunki in a position where you're able to kind of convert off of that momentum immediately. And we are going to see again the Terra Fairy come out here, kind of like you mentioned, right? Going for that Dazzling Gleam, wanting to get damage on both. A big interaction here that's going to matter is, which we don't actually get to see here, is how fast is the Miraidon versus the Ogerpon, because a lot of Miraidons nowadays have been going a bit bulkier. That being said, looking at the general way that it seems to be trained, right, seems to be trained to be a bit faster anyway, so it shouldn't really make that much of a difference. But we are going to see the double up come out here, hit the Ogerpon. The only way that I think this is like ends up being winnable for Hobbit is if you're able to get the mind game right, which in this case, going for Earth Power into Terra Fairy isn't what you want to do. At this point, now you've given up too many resources and too much health to where Miraidon and Urshifu pretty much like run through the rest of this game, right? Even if Pelipper opts to go for something like a wide guard, doesn't really matter here because Wicked Blow is going to be going first. It's going to be taking out that Lando.
Yeah, I'm honestly a bit perplexed with the Pelipper bring, honestly. Outside of the wide guard stopping the Dazzling Gleam, yeah, I'm not really sure what pathing Hobbit was hoping for to make the Pelipper better than the Urshifu or any of the other Pokemon, but yeah, the Dazzling Gleam is going to come out, blocked by the wide guard, but because the Urshifu is faster than the Landorus, we will likely see, yeah, the Wicked Blow into the Landorus, take an easy knockout, and now with the Pelipper having to just wide guard to block any damage, the Urshifu is very free to clean this game up. For a pretty convincing game one from Kunki there.
Yeah, I think a big thing here too, kind of mentioning, that turn one. I don't think you can afford to lead something similar if you're Henry again, right? Like, I think the big problem was Hobbit kind of got called out on lead, and then you were already in an awkward position with something like, Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam, being able to sweep later. There were just so many good options to really like pressure, I think, with that Urshifu and Miraidon. Um, I think going into game two, right? Like maybe leading Ogerpon would probably be a bit more successful just because at the very least you could guaranteed protect your Calyrex for a turn. And even if you go for something like Follow Me, let your Ogerpon go down to a double up and you get that Trick Room up, then because your Landorus is underspeeding most Pokemon, you'd probably be able to exert a lot more pressure, right? So probably going into this game too, I'd definitely like to see an adjustment maybe to something like that Ogerpon and Calyrex, because you'd be able to go for that Follow Me, protect, get that Trick Room up, and then because your Landorus is so slow, you can kind of underspeed the rest of the team as well too. You kind of mentioned that Pelipper bring not being so great. Like I'm not the biggest fan of it either. I feel like even something like Incineroar would be really nice because it would give you the option of being able to go for fake outs later or even having a defensive switch. So that's definitely something I'd be looking out for as well from Hobbit's side.
Yeah, I think pointing out the very volatile lead from Hobbit's End, generally on these Calyrex Ice teams, whether it's in Mungus or Ogerpon Cornerstone or Hearthflame, typically against Miraidon, you generally just lead the Follow Me Pokemon and play a Pokemon down, expecting your Follow Me to go down first turn, and taking either a Trick Room or Glacial Lance damage, and trying to convert off of a strong position from there. Hobbit really just saying, okay, I have to get this turn one call correctly, didn't, and ended up losing his restricted turn one and basically gaining damage into Farigiraf, sure, but once the Calyrex was gone, it was, Farigiraf was basically useless anyways.
Yeah, and you never really want to do that, right? Like giving up your restricted immediately is just so rough, because it's such a big source of like power in these formats in terms of being able to get damage, being able to exert pressure on the board, right? It's just something that like you very rarely want to be in a position where you're just losing it immediately. But we are going to see a complete switch up here. We're actually going to see an Urshifu Pelipper lead, so kind of opting for a completely different approach this time. You do get the pressure of Surging Strikes immediately into the opposing Urshifu, and you have Helping Hand and Close Combat into Miraidon as well. If the Miraidon's not super bulky, it would go down to something like that. So there's like a lot of potential, I think, for Hobbit to make some callouts here. Albeit there are some mind games for sure with the Miraidon, whether it's going to Terra or not. Plus, if there's a Helping Hand or Surging Strikes, or Helping Hand or Close Combat.
Yeah, I think the approach from Hobbit here is pretty telling, just saying, okay, I'm not going to go the defensive route. Game down, I'm leading Pelipper, Urshifu, probably just going to be going Helping Hand, Close Combat, or Surging Strikes to try and take a KO on either Pokemon. You go into the Miraidon, Close Combat with Helping Hand, it doesn't look like it's especially bulky, so a Helping Hand should knock out. But if it goes for Terra Fairy, you can go for Surging Strikes to take the knockout, so definitely a bit of a mind game. He didn't go for the Terra turn 1 last game, just played it unsafe, so definitely a lot of mind games going on between the players, but Hobbit kind of on the back foot, I would say, unless he gets this turn incredibly correctly this turn.
Is it going to be the Surging Strikes or is it going to be Close Combat? If it's Surging Strikes, it'll be a big deal. It's going to be Surging Strikes in the hands. I don't think that's going to be able to get the knockout, so really smart switch here coming out with the Iron Hands. Had that Surging Strikes gone into Miraidon, that would have just been a clean knockout, but now Miraidon able to get a bunch of damage here, which is going to be super significant. That Volt Switch going into that Urshifu, immediately getting that turn 1 knockout. So I think that's a great turn from Kunkey. Pretty scary, I think, right? When you see the Surging Strikes come out before you see where it goes into, but able to execute that turn properly.
Yeah, I guess the idea was clearly, okay, the Urshifu is on the field, I can just take that knockout. So Hobbit is, with the Pokemon in the back, probably the most scared of the Urshifu based on that turn 1. But yeah, perfect switch in. The Iron Hands EV'd perfectly to take that hit. And now, yeah, whether Trick Room goes up or not. Well, first off, you're applying Fake Out pressure, which with Urshifu on the field once again after the Volt Switch is really, really a difficult pin. Whether the Calyrex goes for a Terastallization or not, it's probably going to fall to... actually, if it goes for the Terra, it should live 2 Wicked Blows, but effectively it'll be in range of Sucker Punch or any Dazzling Gleam or any stray attack for the rest of the game, whether it be for Farigiraf, Miraidon, etc. So I do really like Kunkey's position after that turn 1. Definitely navigated a kind of tricky, I hesitate to call it a 50-50, but definitely a volatile turn and comes out very favorable off of it.
Yeah, I've noticed both times. I mean, we kind of mentioned this, right? That Hobbit went for leads that forced really big mind games turn 1, and it felt like both times it kind of came back to, obviously be not so beneficial. We are going to see the Wicked Blow go into the Calyrex here. Kind of a close range, right? Like, I feel like that could kind of go either way. Not to mention that, like, of course, you have other options here. If Calyrex opts to go for something like Glacial Lance the next turn, and gets a double knockout here after surviving on 1, like that could be nice. But there's also the potential that it's just barely able to get that knockout. It looks like, if I'm eyeballing it, to be just out of range of a Wicked Blow, which means Glacial Lance should come out here. But I definitely think a big deal is going to be what Hobbit has in the back as well, right? Like, being able to get that Fake Out and Wicked Blow, though, have that security is good. There was also some other opportunities for different plays here, right? Like, you could have also opted to go for something like a Protect and just letting Iron Hands go down to put yourself in a bit of a maybe stronger position. That being said, though, overall, I'd say this is still looking pretty good for Kunkey, especially because of the trade, but it just misses the knockout. So Lance being able to come out here is a really big deal. Because of Weather Ball going in the hands, though, you're only going to be getting a +1 boost, but it probably matters very little for the fact of it's Trick Room actually here. So I'm not too sure how I feel about that, right? I mean, sure, you're making your Calyrex like slower, but Sucker Punch pressure exists. You have for a draft still that could just reverse the speed tiers. So it's not exactly like the best position ever.
Yeah, definitely. You could have easily taken the knockout on the Urshifu for sure. At that point, it really does depend on the back Pokemon. Of course, Pelipper can block any attacks from the Miraidon if it goes for the Dazzling Gleam with Wide Guard. If you have the Ogerpon in the back, you can redirect single target attacks, and then maybe with the +1 on the Calyrex, you might be able to knock out the Miraidon. I don't imagine so. But yeah, with this situation with Sucker Punch on the field, you need to have a redirection on the field for your Calyrex to do anything, and I think, yeah, with the Farigiraf on the field, it could... Yeah, I think missing the attack boost there is going to be really detrimental, just because you can't take the knockout on the Miraidon at any point in the game with your Calyrex.
Yeah, I think a big thing here too is going to be what's in the back, right? So I think if it's something like Ogerpon in the back, you have the potential of doing something maybe like protecting if you think Sucker Punch is going to come out and bringing in Ogerpon, right? Another option is if Landorus is in the back, right? Maybe you could play a bit riskier with your Calyrex, just kind of go for attack, right? Realistically speaking, though, I think a big thing that you have to be careful with is like, when is the Miraidon getting in? Is it going to be getting in when Trick Room's up, or is it going to be getting in when Trick Room's gone? I think a big thing here too is with conserving the Urshifu, you are going to be stalling a turn, especially covering for if the Calyrex decides not to attack. But we are going to see the Farigiraf actually moves before the Calyrex, so kind of a curious question here of did Trick Room get clicked, or yeah, it seems like Trick Room did end up getting clicked here, but that's not so great, right? You don't necessarily want to invert the speed tiers like that. You are potentially going to be able to set up something like a trade for Weather Ball into Farigiraf, and then attack going into the Cali, but it's just really rough here. Like, I don't think you wanted to take that mind game, and I think this is going to end up losing Hobbit the game probably.
Yeah, I think making a read perhaps that there was going to be a Trick Room on the Farigiraf, so trying to maintain the speed advantage there while also, yeah, not wanting to risk a Glacial Lance Weather Ball into Farigiraf and hoping that KOs it probably wouldn't have. So just trying to make the best of a bad situation. But Yeah, I like that you pointed out Landers in the back. If that was in the back, I imagine if Trick Room stayed up, you could have found a way to win the game. But now with Trick Room down, a double KO just easily coming down onto the Calyrex and the Pelipper, regardless of what's in the back.
It
Yeah, a
was
Sucker Punch.
Landers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Landers would have been great if Trick Room were up for sure. But at this point in the game, yeah, I just can't imagine this being playable.
Yeah, I mean, realistically here too, it's actually really interesting we're seeing Sucker Punch come out here because obviously we know that the Urshifu's faster, but at this point it makes very little difference, right? Because after the Psychic Miraidon's just going to be able to come in and go for something like that Dazzling Gleam to knock out that Lando. So, yeah, you kind of mentioned, right? Like, Hobbit probably playing into that mind game of like, oh, I think Trick Room's going to come out here. So, I'm going to catch the other Trick Room. Maybe also thinking that, like, that's another viable route around Sucker Punch as well, right? So you're simultaneously calling out Sucker Punch and Trick Room at the same time, which is one of the safest plays possible from Kunki's side. So it kind of makes sense, right? Like I could definitely see the way in which that play would work. But Kunki just opting to say like, okay, I'm just going to protect here, see what comes out, and I'm just going to go for a psychic to get some chip realistically always puts Kunki in a spot where you can play from there. So I think that's notably also going for a side psychic, but at this point, not really making much of a difference, right? But yeah, I think in general, like that was a pretty well played game. I felt like Hobbit was putting themselves in a lot of positions where they had to kind of play these mind gamey like turn ones, and even went for a lot of like reads. Whereas Kunki was like, okay, what's like a consistent route I can find to win the game, and like how do I just convert off of that? I felt like Kunki was able to like play the game a lot more safely than Hobbit was.
Yeah, it felt like at every major volatile inflection point where if Hobbit gets a major read, he could swing the game in his favor and have a pretty convincing position with the Landorus. Kunki played around it perfectly and just got the call right. Um, I do want to highlight, yeah, I think in retrospect, the reverse trick room play, as you mentioned, does make a lot more sense. If the sucker punch trick room play comes out and you weather ball knock out the Urshifu, there is a chance at that point that Glacial Lance, weather ball, or helping hand Glacial Lance is enough to clear the game for Landorus in the back, but unfortunately got that play wrong. Got the surging strike play turn wrong as well. So just masterful calls on Kunki's side, as well as just really consistent mid game play to prevent Hobbit from getting a full foothold once again in both games.
Yeah, I definitely would have maybe liked to see that Ogre Pawn in the lead, right? We kind
Mhm.
of saw both games like Hobbit opted for a bit more of a volatile approach, right? Like going for the Landorus and the Calyrex, and then obviously Calyrex going down immediately, which wasn't so great, and then in the game two opting for that Urshifu Pelipper, which in theory is really good because you force a mind game with that helping hand, but again it's still risky, right? So I think maybe could have found some more consistent routes to maybe avoid some of those mind games, but that's kind of the joys of hindsight, right? Like you look back and you kind of see different routes maybe where you could have approached the game differently. And I think Hobbit was just trying to force turns immediately where it's like, okay, if I get this right, I just win. So
Yeah, I think it was interesting in that, yeah, Hobbit went for the aggressive options in both games. Usually in a game one, you might go for a bit of your more safer options, like you said, leading the follow me ogre pawn plus the Calyrex to make sure that you can extend the game and not just lose at turn one. So that over the course of the set, you can get more comfortable with how your opponent's playing, and then maybe make those riskier plays later on. Now that you have a read on how your opponent thinks, how they're going to play the turns. But yeah, Hobbit just going into it both games, saying, "All right, if I can just read my opponent correctly, I'll be in an excellent spot." But both times coming up just a bit short.
absolutely. But now, going into our next set, let's take a look at the next two teams that we're going to be seeing. So we're going to be seeing a Calyrex Shadow Balance team with Clefairy. I mean, this is a team that's been around since the first go of Regulation G, right? So this isn't anything too crazy being used by Robbie. And then we have a team that we saw get top eight at Worlds. Um, so used by Ari. So kind of using that Terra Normal Urshifu to get around the opposing Calyrex next to that for a draft, which is pretty cool. I will say it is really interesting sometimes when you're looking at like the first go of Regulation G versus the second go, right? I feel like this is definitely two teams that look very true to like what early regulation G looked like in the first like run through, right? Whereas like I would say like these teams you haven't seen as much in the second go around, right? So I think that it's kind of like an interesting dynamic for sure. And apparently we do actually have it backwards as well, by the way. The bottom team is going to be Robbie's team and the top is going to be Ari's. Um Obviously we'll correct ourselves if there's another correction on the correction. But yeah, that should be pretty much that. But I think it's always really interesting to see like the older regulation G teams versus like the newer ones, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think I hesitate to call them dated. But typically the Caloric Shadow Rider team's going a bit more offensive on the Clefairy slot, using still a bulky, but an Ogrepon Hearthflame that can have the option to just burst out and do a ton of damage. And then the Robbie team with the Paranormal Urshifu coming straight from, I think it was top 8 worlds. NJ taking that to a really deep finish. But speaking on the matchup itself, like you mentioned, the Terranormal Urshifu is going to be really critical, or at least I think it would, if not for Psychic being present on the Caloric Shadow Rider. You still have redirection to be able to, get around that. But I think it being Psychic Life Orb instead of, for example, a Covert Cloak Draining Kiss means that the Urshifu survivability is not that much better with the Terra Normal. You can tank the Astral Barrages a bit better, but yeah, this is a Calyrex Ice team with a Farigiraf, which does advantage it a bit more into the Calyrex Shadow Rider teams than it typically is, just having the, of course, immunity to the Astral Barrage as well as the ability to switch in and nullify Fake Out is definitely really important. Otherwise, you kind of just get Fake Out cycled um, and really gain no ground against the Calyrex while they set up multiple nasty plots. But yeah, I do think that a lot of excellent tools between the two players, but this is one of the more better teched out teams against Calyrex Shadow Rider team, or the Calyrex Ice Rider here.
Absolutely. I mean, I think another interesting part of this matchup, right, is so first off, there's like a couple of different things that I think also impact this matchup. First off, the Incin doesn't have access to Will-O-Wisp, so it makes the Calyrex Ice's Terra Water a lot more threatening in front of Incineroar, right? Because Incineroar doesn't really have a great way to hit it. Of course, you can go for something like knockoff and then parting shot, but that is an extra turn you have to take to kind of sit there. Terra Water obviously helps a little bit with the Calyrex Ice, though. And then as well too, worth noting that the Clefairy is running Sing, right? So because it's running Sing and not something like After You, instead of focusing on like After You Astro Barrage +2, it's going to be focusing on maybe spamming those things in Trick Room, which makes it a little bit scarier to leverage, and you have to be careful maybe when you're setting Trick Room, or if you are setting Trick Room, are you okay with being in front of a Sing Clefairy?
Yeah, I hadn't even noticed that there's no Will-O-Wisp on the Incineroar. Incineroar. Also notable is its Rocky Helmet, which is pretty much just net positive in this matchup. There's no safety goggles, but generally the Rocky Helmet Incineroar is really, really effective against Calyrex Ice Rider teams with only an Urshifu to take out Incineroar, but this one actually has Regieleki offering pretty solid damage with Thunderbolt, and then pretty clear one-shots if Intimidate isn't on the board with the Ivy Cudgel, and Landorus just easily cleaning it up with the Earth Power. So yeah, Incineroar less effective than it usually would be, but still quite strong. I'm wondering whether Robbie is going to end up going for a faster mode with the Regieleki Electro Webbing. It's not a Covert Cloak Calyrex Shadow Rider, as we mentioned, so those Electro Webs will stick if it's trying to go for a nasty plot sweep. And then maybe the Landorus, Ogrepon, and Urshifu can kind of clean up from there. But you can also just go a little bit safer, in my opinion, with the Farigiraf mode, and try to go into Trick Room. And you could gamble with Sing, I guess. I think the Clefairy Sing definitely introduces a lot of volatility to this matchup if you go into Trick Room. So that's kind of the argument between staying in Trick Room with the Farigiraf and being a bit safer, and going a bit more offensive with the Regieleki and not having to deal with the Clefairy going for Sing and introducing so much variance to how the game can progress.
Absolutely. But with that being said, let's go and take a look at the match itself so we can start seeing how these players are going to be approaching it. So, as we noted before, Robbie is going to be using that Cali Ice team. So, obviously, a smaller version of what we said earlier. And we're going to be seeing the Shadow Rider team come from Ari's side. So, I think a big impact rate is you kind of mentioned, there's a lot of different ways, you can make the game volatile with Sing, right? So I think we both kind of honed in on the fact that Clefairy is likely to come in this matchup. I think also too, talking about that Rocky helmet giving you a net positive in the matchup, absolutely true, right? You're able to get like a bit of chip every time that Calyrex opts to go for something like a high horsepower. If Urshifu gets called out on the surging strikes, right, and maybe if Terra Water, you're able to, eat up a lot of damage, which is super nice. That being said, right, it's going to be about like maybe what order you decide to take your mons in from Ari's perspective. I think notably here, another thing you have to be a little bit careful with is Aleki. Aleki and Landorus can definitely get out of hand if you opt to drop your Rillaboom and decide not to take it. So it's something you might feel a little forced to bring here. That being said, though, right, like there are going to be a couple different options here. I think from as well too, from Robbie's point of view, another thing to consider is, do I want to lead that Urshifu next to Friddraff, right? Because I'd be able to get like a Surging Strikes off. I have that Terra Normal pressure immediately. Of course, there's still that Psychic pressure with Life Orb, but you know, if you're bulky enough, you might be able to survive, right? So there's definitely a lot of intricate pieces at work here, and I'm very interested to see, you know, how Robbie opts to approach this because I feel like it very much will change the pacing. Whereas Ari opted to go for a bit safer lead. But we are going to see that for Friddraff and Urshifu come out here against the Urshifu and Rillaboom lead.
Yeah, so fake out pressure completely nullified by the presence of Armor Tail Farigiraf on the field. Looks like the battle is taking a second to fully initiate, but yeah, the Grassy Terrain getting active on the field. So going to be healing all the Pokemon on the field. Grassy Glide less effective against the Urshifu than it typically would be. I am typically, I think with the Mystic Water Urshifu, there's a bit more bulk, so it might not be max speed. But yeah, looking at the bulk on the Rillaboom, I don't think the speed interaction is going to be Rillaboom favored. You can U-turn the Farigiraf. It's not Electric Seed like we saw in the previous battle, so going to be doing a healthy chunk. Followed up with Surging Strikes, I imagine that'll get pretty close to a KO, and if you want to ensure it, you could go for a Wood Hammer to allow for the Rillaboom to fake out cycle later in the battle. But yeah, definitely advantage offensively to Ari significantly with the presence of the Rillaboom, which is going to be pretty hard to clear unless you go for a Helping Hand close combat, which even at that point might not knock out the Rillaboom.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different options here. I mean, you have to consider a couple different routes to go. I think playing to remove the Urshifu first from Ari's point of view is pretty smart, right? Because Urshifu is kind of one of those Pokemon that is able to really just sit there and absorb like damage from the opposing Urshifu. There are a couple of risks here, though, right? Like if your Urshifu gets double targeted, that would be a really big deal here. You are able to get the opposing Urshifu down to like that yellow range, but are catching the close combat into the Rillaboom slot, which is really good here, right? It's good to be able to preserve that tool. And we are going to see the Furdra follow up here with a Psychic Noise, or a Psychic, I believe, into the Urshifu, which is going to get it down the Focus Sash. Now, although you were able to call out the close combat into the Rillaboom successfully, I do think that having your Urshifu go down to load this early is probably a little bit of like what you would not want to see, mostly because Urshifu is so impactful for dealing with the Kali Ice later, and Rillaboom isn't exactly the Pokemon you want in front of Kali Ice. Even if you commit a Terra, it's still a little bit rough. So I think overall, I'd say the trade probably favors Robbie just a little bit, but it's still definitely playable from here.
I do like the Clefairy coming into the field, knowing that there's a high likelihood that you take a Psychic on the Urshifu and are then susceptible to an Aqua Jet from the opposing Urshifu. Getting the Clefairy means that you have a Follow Me active, and whether you go for it or not, it really limits the potential for Aqua Jet to even come out this turn. And we see a Terrestrialization coming out, a Stellar Terra. I believe that was from Ari's
Ari side, yeah.
Urshifu.
Ari
Yep.
side, yeah.
So I think we saw a Helping Hand. Yeah, we saw a Helping Hand. So really, any Pokemon this hits is going to go down. Obviously the Urshifu, but because of the Helping
The
Hand,
Aqua
he
Jet.
makes the read. Aqua Jet ignoring Follow Me entirely, saying, you know what? I think you're going to go aggressive. You went pretty hard turn one, an aggressive switch, calling by close combat. I'm going to expect you to play it a little dangerous this turn and knocks out the recently terrestrialized Urshifu out with an Aqua Jet and follows up with a Psychic on the Clefairy. Definitely a huge gain in momentum for Robbie that turn.
Yeah, I think that was like a really big call, honestly. Ari taking a really big risk there, and I'm not sure if it was completely worth it, right? Like, of course, if you are able to get that knockout on Giraffe, it's a great turn, right? But there's just so many different ways it can go wrong, and you're also committing your terrestrialization. So if you lose your terrestrialization for free like that, it's just pretty much game. Or not exactly game, but it's pretty rough, right? Like you're not really exactly in a position you want to be in. So I definitely feel like now you have to kind of rely on Sing to maybe give you some momentum to pull back into the game. Also, too, Robbie doesn't even necessarily have to click Trick Room here, right? Like, especially because Rillaboom came in, you're not really pressured that much at all. And you kind of have that opportunity for free Surging Strikes into that Clefairy.
Yeah, I think that was definitely super risky, as you said, not going for Follow Me, but the Rillaboom has come in, threatening a switch, just switching immediately, not really applying a lot of consistent offensive pressure this game, noticing from Ari, but right into the Calyrex. So if the Urshifu, yeah, I mean, the Urshifu just kind of feels free to go for an attack here. We'll see what it ends up going for, whether it be Surging Strikes or Close Combat. Finally gets tired of the switching into immunities or resist, just take the free damage into the Surging Strikes. With Rillaboom on the board, there was no potential resist there, I believe, outside of Raging Bolt, which you don't really expect the Calyrex to be benched in this matchup, so a pretty safe play. And now we see a, God forbid, foul play come out from the choreograph, but it is going to be a
Oh my
foul
god, it is
play.
a
Oh
foul
my
play.
goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a brutal game. I mean, also like it's kind of weird, right? So obviously, like looking at the game, it feels like there were just a couple turns where like some unnecessary risks were taken, right? So immediately, what jumps to my brain, right, is like you turn one switch, but you're not really gaining that much momentum because now you're down the sash, which is kind of awkward on the Urshifu. And then on top of that, right after going for that stellar CC, definitely felt like a huge swing in momentum where like the game pretty much was just over, right? It really felt like you kind of had to be exerting more pressure if you were Ari from the go, and also too like that early switch looked like it would be good, but I don't think it was actually as good as it might have looked. Like I think you were supposed to just honestly accept the damage on the Rillaboom and just go for a double attack and get rid of Fur Draft immediately. Because getting rid of the Fur Draft is like one of the main things that's kind of impeding your Calyrex Shadow from doing work. And it just felt like because of how passive Ari was playing, Robbie was just able to make like one good call getting damage down, right? And then able to make like a really safe play to just get the KO on the Urshifu, and from there it just completely snowballed, right? So I feel like Ari really needs to rein it back. Like you're using an archetype that like gives you a lot of tools to be able to win the game with Shadow Rider. So you need to maybe like rein it back a little bit and like just make the safer plays, right? Like Woodhammer close combat turn one into Giraffe would have been a really strong play, and it would have given you enough momentum to where like Astral Barrage would have been really threatening, right? And it felt like um maybe overcooking a little bit here and kind of taking an approach where, oh, I'm going to call out, where the close combat goes, everything, and then, I get aqua jetted, I lose, and, now I have to play the next game. So,
Yeah, I wonder what the thought process was there. Like, yes, you could have gone for the stellar knockout into the Fergraph, but like you said, you had that knockout turn one if you just took some damage that, in the grand scheme of thing, damage into Rillaboom isn't that important since it's just going to get Glacial Lanced at some point in the game regardless. So, yeah. Also, you just had Follow Me on the field, so you had a free knockout into the Urshifu, you had a lot of damage into the Fergraph, and your Clefairy probably wasn't going down from a single Surging Strikes. It would have taken a double up, and then you just get your Calyrex on the field for free in a really threatening position. So I think, like you said, we're likely to see Ari rein it back a little bit, maybe play things a little bit more consistently and avoid those hard reads. But maybe that's just their shtick, and they keep going after it and hit a little luckier this game. But yeah, really excellent call out from Robbie in the first game. Don't want to take it away from him. It was a aggressive call on Ari's side, but Robbie called it perfectly and was able to basically win the game off of it.
it also felt like Rillaboom in the lead actually was a really good call out, right? Um,
Mhm.
but it might not be as good this time around because there's also the potential of the adjustment from Robbie, right? So, generally speaking, right, like it was able to put on a lot of pressure, but we are actually going to see a bit of a deviation from the previous game, opting to go for Incineroar instead. Now, I don't necessarily think the Incineroar versus the Rillaboom was the issue of the previous game. I do think having a useful adjustment there is kind of nice, especially too because it might be something that's like less expected. But yeah, I definitely think going into this game, right, like you kind of mentioned, like if it's their shtick, like maybe they'll go for more reads, right? I definitely think a area where sometimes players can get called out is like maybe playing too aggressive, like not being able to switch between playstyles. Although these are obviously two very capable players, so I definitely think that's something that can happen here. Although we are going to see a big adjustment here. It is going to be Lecky and the Calyrex Ice. That being said, though, it is going to be a Urshifu in the lead versus the Alecki. So not your most ideal scenario for sure. A big thing that's going to matter here is how is the Calyrex trained. If it's trained to be fast enough after an Electro Web, then a Sash Urshifu, something like Electro and Terra and Lance here is a really, really good play, right? Not to mention you could just live the double up anyways of both attacks. But I definitely think this is a situation where Ari is a little bit on the back foot from lead.
Yeah, I think even if you don't outspeed the Urshifu and Like it goes for a protect or something. Just getting the Electro Web and Glacial Lance off onto the Calyrex is pretty important. It forces an Aqua Jet from the Urshifu the next turn, and then at that point, I think you're just getting enough damage with Glacial Lance off that your Pokemon in the back, whether it be Ogerpon, if we see a bit more aggressive of an approach here, or if you go into the Farigiraf and just set up Trick Room, I think you have the damage you need to really handle the rest of the team and start snowballing with the Calyrex. But we're going to get into the turn. We see a Terastallization immediately from the Urshifu going for the Stellar Terra. So yeah, just going on the offensive, definitely not going to be, if Electroweb goes down, going to be bringing it down to Sash, and we'll see the speed interaction from this Calyrex and the Urshifu, which we also see going for a Terastallization. Smart choice going for the Tear Water in case you see a greedy Surging Strikes to preserve defense, although it's most likely a close combat regardless. Or sorry,
Is this
yeah, you're going Tear to avoid the Astro Barrage. I forgot that guy was on the field. But yeah,
this
Electroweb
might
comes
knock
out.
out?
Yeah, if we see, you're thinking close combat plus Astral might get there.
Yeah, close combat Astral might just get the KO, right? I think that's a really smart to Stellar Terra here, actually. As long as the Urshifu's faster, that's definitely going to be able to get the knockout, I think, here. And then you'd have Aqua Jet pressure on the Alecki, so it'd be a really good turn one here coming out from Ari. We are going to see the close combat does come out first, so Calyrex isn't going to be outspeeding. Is this going to get the knockout? It should. It does get a clean knockout, so I think that's an incredibly good turn. The only thing that can make this, like, still pretty salvageable is maybe if you have like the fur giraffe in the back, right? So that you can block Aqua Jet. If Aqua Jet can't be blocked though, this is definitely a really tough position for Robbie.
Yeah, the only solace you get here is the Electroweb on the Calyrex, which once the Regieleki goes down, you can easily just switch out the Calyrex and start sweeping things in the back with the speed advantage if Farigiraf isn't here. So as you said, really excellent Terastallization there. Uses the one-time Fighting type boost to the Terrast on the Urshifu from the Stellar Terastallization to take a pretty guaranteed knockout. Tear or not, obviously it just took a knockout there. So yeah, really impressive play.
Yeah, I mean, a big thing here too will also be like, what is the follow-up this turn, right? So another play you could make here that would be pretty safe is switching in for Giraffe for a Lucky and just going for Surging Strikes into the Calyrex. And then from there, you'd actually be able to put on quite a pressure overall. Another option you'd have also is just straight up saying like, okay, I don't think you're going to Aqua Jet because of the fear for a Giraffe. So I'm just go for a double attack here and get as much damage as possible on the board. There's definitely a lot of different branching ways this can go, but we are going to see the Alecki switch out here. It is likely going into the for draft coming out here, and we are probably going to see that Surging Strikes go into that Calyrex as well. But the Calyrex is opting to switch out, and it's going to be bringing in that Incineroar. Incineroar. And because we actually saw a double switch coming out here, which is going to be bringing in that Clefairy, Incineroar should be able to take that Surging Strikes while getting that Rocky Helmet chip down. So that is going to be a really significant turn coming out here from Ari, and a great reposition.
Yeah, like you mentioned, the presence of the Clefairy's Friend Guard means that even with the Mystic Water being present on the Urshifu, the Incineroar is still going to be taking it fairly comfortably. 50% on the Urshifu, all that bulk gone, and now a Psychic. If it wasn't going to knock out before, easily will. The only real problem for Ari at this point is going to be clearing out the Farigiraf, which, although might be hard, at some point if you get enough boosts on the Calyrex Shadow Rider, you can just go for Psychics to clear that. You just need to start chipping the Farigiraf down a little bit. And honestly, the Clefairy is protecting it so well at this point, or is protecting your Pokemon pretty well at this point. So yeah, the Farigiraf being able to do any meaningful damage over time is going to be a challenge. But the Urshifu on the field, now with the Armor Tail active, you do have a fairly free Surging Strike into the Clefairy, which will do a lot of damage. Not sure if a Helping Hand will allow it to knock out, but yeah, definitely a really excellent amount of damage from the Rocky Helmet on that previous turn. Now just how to navigate the battle forward from Ari. Goes for a Follow Me to start it off.
Yeah, I mean, another big thing here that you could have gone for was a Sing, but opting not to take that risk, right? We are going to see the Surging Strikes go into the Clefairy here. It is going to be able to live back pretty comfortably, but we likely are going to see something like a follow-up Psychic here, just to get some chip. A big thing here, too, is that Incineroar is going to be free to go for something like that knockoff into the Fur Draft. Getting a bunch of damage down. That's pretty significant damage to be getting down on the board here. We are going to be seeing that Psychic come out here, just trying to get as much damage as possible, with Clefairy barely being able to hang on, which means that now you can opt to go for something like maybe another knockoff in the Fur Draft to get rid of it and go for a Follow Me, or you could even just opt to go for something like a Parting Shot, reposition, and get yourself in a good spot. But definitely getting rid of Fur Draft is the priority here, because if you're able to do that, you will be able to go for an Aqua Jet later, and you could just opt to go for a Follow Me here to guarantee that you will get that damage down. And it's not like a Lecky can switch in for fur draft, right? You are going to be getting knocked out there either way. So I think this is a pretty strong play from Ari's position.
Yeah, kind of a yeah. I think helping hand looking at the damage roll wouldn't have knocked out the Clefairy regardless, so just following up with a Psychic. I wonder how it would have gone if you had gone for a Trick Room that turn. Maybe you can actually sweep the Calyrex and the Urshifu in the back with the Urshifu in Trick Room before the Incineroar can beat you, but that does, of course, introduce Sing um, accuracy checks. But yeah, we see a Follow Me coming out from the Clefairy. Easy knockout from the first hit of Surging Strikes, but we saw the speed interaction between the Incineroar and the Farigiraf last turn. Knockoff very likely just going to be coming out and clearing it off the field.
Yeah, so we are going to be seeing the knockoff come out here. It is going to get the knockout on the first draft. So at this point, probably putting Ari in a very strong winning position. I think, again, we just kind of saw the reward of that big call out from turn one, right? Being able to get that, immediate knockout on the Terra Water Calyrex Ice was a huge deal. And now, also getting that chip on the Alecki with that Astral Barrage. It was a really aggressive turn one, but it paid off super well. And now just being able to go for that Aqua Jet, taking out the Alecki and just going for something like a parting shot into Shifu would allow you to reposition and get yourself in a good spot, right? So at this point, maybe this is a situation in which, from Robbie's point of view, you need to think, okay, so, my adjustment obviously didn't go so well, but is that because maybe I could have made a different play that would have called out, what came out from Ari? Or do I just want to completely readjust like my lead or do something completely different?
Yeah, I want to. This game is more or less wrapped up with the Urshifu just able to Aqua Jet through any potential protects from the Regieleki, at which point the Urshifu is just food for the Calyrex Shadow Rider in the back. I do want to highlight once again just the brilliance of that turn one. The combination of Astral Barrage and a Stellar Terra close combat. Looking at Robbie's team, there's actually nothing that can switch in and take that hit combination outside of the Farigiraf, which probably can't win the battle. You probably can't win the battle if you just take that close combat turn one straight up. So yeah, really smart call, just expecting his opponent to waste a lot of resources on trying to kind of be cheeky and hope that the Calyrex doesn't get doubled up that turn and just expertly calls it and basically not quite wins the game on the spot, but slowly brings himself into a position where Robbie can't really do a whole lot to come back. So yeah, just going through the motions here on wrapping this end game up.
It definitely made it hard to come back from, right? Like I would say, obviously, it wasn't a impossible situation, but it definitely stacked the odds in Ari's favor as much as possible, right? As well too, obviously, going for that Astral Rush here, I thought it was really funny because you could see the thought process of wait, is it Terra normal before I lock Astral Barrage? Is Terra available? But obviously getting rid of the Terra Calyrex immediately. But Astral Barrage going to come out here. I think this was a lot better from Ari. It felt like even though the turn one was pretty aggressive, there was a lot more thought put into each play, right? Kind of making some more defensive plays, reining it in a little bit more, which is kind of what we talked about, wanting to see maybe going into that game too, just to, obviously get yourself in the right spot. I think going into game three, I think Ari's found a better balance between playing aggressive versus playing defensively, right? And I think leaning into that for sure for game three would be helpful. Now, from Robbie's point of view, you got to be really careful. I think a big thing that was impactful in that match really was just the fact that you were able to get rid of that Calyrex Ice immediately. So maybe Robbie needing to be a little bit more aware of, hey, I need to protect my Calyrex and make sure it doesn't go down so quickly. Otherwise, it's going to put me in a bit of a compromising position. Going into this next game, I felt like the Alecki was a pretty good choice here with the fur draft. I think it's just maybe about what other Pokemon do you want there? It felt like all the Pokemon that Robbie brought were fine in both games, but it definitely felt like in the second game that it was kind of a tricky position to navigate from. Also, to just maybe not expecting Ari to full send that Terra Stellar close combat and Astral Barrage.
Did we see Robbie's fourth Pokemon in the first game? I don't recall if the game ended before that.
Let me think, because it was. Oh yeah, because Urshifu fur draft kind of just tore through the whole game, right?
Yeah.
So I guess we didn't. Yeah, I guess we didn't really see. So maybe it was the same brain,
yeah.
right?
I wonder if we end up seeing Robbie go back to that initial game plan, saying, "All right, the Trick Room game plan is more consistent. Let's just go with that." Given the turn one Stellar close combat Astral Barrage pin from the first game, and Ari just going for that lead, winning that game, there's a high likelihood that they go back to it. You maybe just try and get the Trick Room up and sweep from there. But yeah, we saw that Ari is not going to be following up with that winning strategy, going to be pivoting to a far more defensive game plan with the Clefairy Calyrex Shadow Rider lead.
Yeah, so we are going to actually see a complete lead adjustment from both players, right? So both using leads that they hadn't used before. We are going to see that Aleki and Furdraff able to go for that immediate helping hand and electric move to get some damage. But the tricky thing is here is because Clefairy's in a lead, like I'd say the Calyrex is pretty well protected. You also, another thing you have to be a little bit scared of though is immediate sing pressure coming out onto the Furdraff as well is pretty scary. But there's definitely like a lot of options from Robbie's side that can be a little bit annoying, right? Like maybe you opt to go for that Thunderbolt and foul play, calling out that the Clefairy gets greedy and goes for a sing, right? That could get the knockout on the Calyrex, right? You realistically, like even if you Thunderbolt and Helping Hand, right, and a Clefairy goes for that Follow Me, it's still going to be a decent chunk of damage, and it's still going to be a little bit awkward for the Fur Draft. So it definitely feels like there's a lot of like good opportunities here.
Yeah, we're going to be seeing a pretty late lock, but a Terra Dark Astral Barrage, and I think that was a Follow Me. So immediate Terra, I guess fearing the likelihood of that foul play coming out into the Calyrex Shadow Rider. I guess maybe I missaw the turn, but I don't think this Terra makes a ton of sense if you're not expecting yeah, I guess the Clefairy to be going for Follow Me, so maybe it went for Sing, but we see Helping Hand come out from the Refer Graph. Yeah, no Follow Me, Thunderbolt immediately into the Calyrex Shadow
Oh,
Rider,
the
immediately
para.
gets a Paralysis. Wow, yeah, that huge para for later in the battle. We see the Helping Hand do a ton of damage over to a KO, and we see Astral Barrage not affecting the Furgraph, of course, bringing the Regieleki down to Sash, but of course we are definitely going to be seeing a Sing from the Clefairy,
He's
so
gonna
let's
get
see
back.
if we start gambling with Sleep turns and Paralysis turns this battle. We see the Sing come out, and it does look like it missed into the Furgraph.
Oh man, if that had connected, that could have definitely been like really good here. But yeah, I mean that's a really rough turn one from for Ari, right? Like you committed your Terra, so now you don't have Terra to really throw anywhere else, and on top of that, your Terra was basically wasted because it wasn't used for the purpose it was like like there was no foul play coming out there. And the maximum amount of damage plus a paralysis came out onto the Calyrex. So this is really, really rough if you're Ari for sure. Of course, you maybe have the opportunity of like landing like one more Sing at this point, but at this point now you're relying on this Sing that like even keep you in the game, and even then there's just like so much risk associated. Because also too, like by going for that protect from Robbie's side, you're just basically saying like, hey, if Calyrex is gonna protect, like I can scout that out and see. But actually ends up getting paralyzed, which is really funny. So it doesn't use up that protect.
Yeah, optimal Protect, we see the Sing, and it looks like it missed into the Furgraph again, so the Protect trying to dodge that potential to follow sleep on the Regieleki. Called perfectly by Ari, but unfortunately ends up missing both Sings, so the 55% chance, I believe, going 0 for 2, pretty unlucky there, but yeah, we see the Regieleki now going for an Electro Web, doing a lot of damage to the Calyrex and just really adding insult to injury in terms of the speeds. At this point, the Calyrex, if it's trained a bit faster, might even still be outspeeding it, with a Glacial Lance Prime for a double knockout, potentially.
Yeah, it is worth noting that the Electroweb also did miss the Clefairy, so had it connected, the Clefairy might have gone down there, right?
Mhm.
But because the miss had come out, right, like now the Clefairy is going to have another opportunity to go for something like a Sing. So the big thing is going to be, does the Sing connect here? This is going to be the last opportunity for it to go for, probably, and we are going to see finally Sing connects. That being said, though, it does feel like it's a little bit late for you to be landing the Sing, just because now with all the Electrowebs and the paralysis, Calyrex Ice is going to be super scary here, right? Like now you're just going to have to accept that a Glacial Lance is going to come out. Furdraff is going to have a turn to burn a sleep turn, right? So there's definitely like a lot of pressure coming out from Robbie's side still, especially too if that Urshifu's in the back, right? Like a lot of the pieces here are starting to be worn down to where Urshifu will be able to clean up properly if maybe one Psychic gets off on Urshifu or you're able to get that Surging Strikes into the Incineroar, especially since you already used Terror Dark on the Calyrex.
Yeah, if I'm looking at my speeds right, you'd really only need about 75 speed to outspeed a max speed Calyrex here, which on this team, I think they typically run a bit faster on the Calyrex, so definitely prime for a double knockout. The Calyrex might not even be able to protect if it, isn't able to get through the paralysis, but of course we're going to see the Burgraph switch out first, but I think the Calyrex also switching out safely into the Incineroar to tank a Glacial Lance reasonably well, but a really smart switch from Robbie, expecting that. Getting ahead of the next turn, the Sleeping Furgraph not especially useful. We can bring it back in when we need priority blocking, but for now, let's just get something that's a bit more active on the board, which is going to be especially useful against this Incineroar that's just come in.
Yeah, I mean, I think another interesting part of this here is going to be what are you expecting to come out this next turn, right? So you're going to be going for this Glacial Lance, of course, getting some big damage. Well, yeah, the respectable damage, I'd say, on both Pokemon. But a big question here is now, do you go for Surging Strikes into the Incineroar here? And do you expect Fake Out to come out, right? If you expect Fake Out to come out here, it's very safe to just go for something like a switch to Fur Draft and Surging Strikes to get rid of the Incineroar and then play to have your Calyrex win the rest of the game. But if you think that something like, maybe, um, there's going to be just a, like maybe hard switch or something, you can like hard switch maybe Calyrex sack it for Incineroar and going for a close combat into Urshifu. That could make the game a little dicier, right? So this is going to be a really big turn here. Are we going to see the fur draft come in on the fake out as well?
No switch, and we did see that Ari went for the fake out. We see an instant terrestrialization. As soon as well, not as thought it was going to be the Urshifu, but the Calyrex goes for the terrestrialization, safe against the Incineroar, doesn't want to get super effective damage from a knockoff or Flare Blitz, as well as having the resistance to the Surging Strike. We see the fake out come out into the Urshifu, stopping it from moving this turn, and we see the close combat double up into that Urshifu as well, bringing it low and in range of another close combat in the subsequent turn. Well, the Calyrex Ice is going to be free to go for an attack or set up Trick Room. Goes for the Glacial Lance, just opting for the consistent damage. But I do like that close combat a lot at this point. The resources, at this point, the Incineroar is in range of a high horsepower, most likely. It's going to be close if the Clefairy comes in, probably won't knock out, but you do have a knockout into the Urshifu slot. Pretty much, you do just have it guaranteed, outspeeding the Urshifu, as we've seen across multiple games. You could switch in the Fergaraf, but not really worried about that. Just want the consistent damage here.
I mean, the big thing here too is that you can just keep spamming Lance, and at this point, I don't know if there's enough to deal with the Calyrex, especially for the fact that there's no Will-O-Wisp on the Incineroar, right? So if you know that, like, Surging Trick to the Urshifu here, what really stops something like a Lance from coming out and just getting a knockout, right? You knock out the Urshifu, you get some chip into the opposing Incineroar. Even if a knockoff from Incineroar comes in, that's not really going to be enough damage to be able to threaten a situation in which you can't knock out the Calyrex and Clefairy in the back. You're just going to see the Lance come out here. It is going to give the Calyrex +1. So even though this Incineroar is faster, if a Parting Shot comes out, it's going to bring the Calyrex back down to neutral, which isn't exactly the best scenario ever. The Calyrex is paralyzed. The Clefairy is not really going to be faster, so Lance is going to come out. At this point, it's a pretty rough situation. There are outs for sure, but it's definitely a situation in which you have to be really careful with this Calyrex, and it feels like honestly there might not be enough in the tank to stop it.
Yeah, you do get, with Life Orb, you're going to knock out your own Calyrex. You get one attack with it. Because the Furgraph is asleep and it hasn't taken a sleep turn, I believe, you do have the opportunity to hit that Calyrex with potentially a Astro Barrage knockoff. And if that combination KOs, honestly, you might be able to 1v1 the Furgraph. You probably would with the remaining Clefairy and Incineroar, but it's really just going to come down to whether the Calyrex can move, get the Astro Barrage, and probably needs a crit on one of Astro Barrage or knockoff to take this knockout on the terrestrialized Calyrex Ice. I do want to, just highlight that even though that Ari had a solid switch in the back, had Incineroar and the Urshifu able to take multiple Glacial Lances over time, just the fact that there was no immediate damage pressure on the Calyrex really caught up to him in the end with, it coming down to this where you just really need some fortune in your favor to be able to close the game out against the Calyrex.
Yeah, at this point, you're just hoping you're able to get the knockout with the double up. I mean, that's the best you can really do here. But
Oh,
the paralysis coming out here, pretty much guaranteeing that there will be no way to knock out the Calyrex now, which leaves it completely open to throw out this Glacial Lance and is going to be getting a double knockout here, which should pretty much guarantee the game for Robbie here. I mean, even if that Psychic had come out here, it did kind of look like it was in a range where, I mean, it's a Calyrex size, right? Like, it's a pretty bulky Pokemon, so it's probably always able to survive that. But obviously feels a little bad you weren't even able to, gamble for the chance to be able to knock it out.
yeah, really well played from both players. I think that not enough can really be said about Ari's conversion or switch up from the first game where it was just really aggressive, honestly over aggressive play to a bit safer of a style, but unfortunately got punished pretty hard on an excellent turn one, helping hand Thunderbolt Reed into paralysis to really add insult to injury. So, yeah, over the course of the game, made it really hard to position the Calyrex effectively to sweep some of the faster Pokemon on Robbie's team, and Robbie took full advantage of it. Full advantage, just dealing consistent damage with them before finally bringing in that Calyrex to just slowly whittle away the remaining resources of Ari's team.
Yeah, I think it definitely feels like there were maybe some better ways for Ari to approach the game, especially in that game one, right? But I think that's a big like showcase of like something in VGC that I think is really important, which is sometimes you're gonna have games where you get unlucky, right? And like so, for example, like that paralysis on the game three, right? Like it definitely was a situation that made the game a lot harder for Ari, but making sure that you're always playing well and pulling yourself ahead in terms of small margins in earlier games is really important so that even if you get a bit unlucky later, you're still maybe up a game or two, right? And it felt like Ari kind of gave away like that ticket for game one really quickly, right? With that call out and taking that risk. So sometimes, I mean, I think that's a good showcase of like knowing when to take the risk and whether you can and like how that can come back maybe like later on in a set to give you less room for flexibility, or like less room for bad luck, right?
Yeah, I
So
agree. That's a really good point. Just pointing out that set play within Pokemon is not only player to player, but also how far down you are in a game or how far down you are in a set means that you can't afford to get lucky or unlucky later in this set. So, really good point there.
yeah. But we have our final match to take a look at here. So let's take a look at our final matchup. It's going to be a match that's going to be using this popular Zamazenta team. Now, we've seen this team around before. Zamazenta in general is a very, very like bulky, kind of like slow Pokemon in some cases, and then other cases it leans into the more offensive nature of that body press next to Chin Pao, next to stronger attackers. But this specific version, is using that Dondozo and Ting Lu. So opting to go for a little bit of a slower approach here, kind of a slower burn, and then kind of setting up for that body press to be stronger late game. And then, taking a look at the other team as well, it's just going to be another standard Calyrex shadow balance team. Now, of course, there are some notable differences here. One of the main ones being that spell tag with that nasty plot is going to be a huge deal. Notably, running Terra Normal, which means that you are susceptible to certain pins. So, for example, Throat Chopper, Sucker Punch, pressuring a KO, and the Calyrex has to Terra to normal. Body Press can follow up, right? As well, too, this Incineroar is running Will-O-Wisp, which will be a really big deal in this matchup, of course, especially versus Zamazenta. And then as well, too, notably the Clefairy again being here. Now, it is running after you instead of Sing, so after you kind of a dead slot in this matchup, would have definitely preferred to have Sing here, but, still not the worst Pokemon ever. And then you have that Sash Shifu, which also can be really good here, especially for pressuring that Ting Lu, pressuring a couple of other Pokemon with the fighting type coverage, and Terra Fairy Raging Bolt, which means maybe when you throw out that Terra Fairy, you're able to resist that body press. But since this Zamazenta's Behemoth Bash, it's still going to be taking a decent chunk of damage.
Yeah, looking at Suya's team, there's not a whole lot of ways to even break the Tinglu. Just that's the thing that pops out to me most immediately. You have, of course, the Urshifu, but honestly, if you just say, I'm going to commit my Terastallization to poison here, there's not a lot that can immediately handle that outside of the Psyshock on the Calyrex Shadow Rider. So I think a priority might just be trying to chip things down with the Tinglu before the Urshifu comes in, force it to maybe take some Surging Strikes. But yeah, I do think that the Tinglu Zamazenta is not exactly what you're hoping to see when you come in with a setup Calyrex Shadow Rider team, especially with Psyshock. At least with Psyshock, you can hit. Yeah, I'm not loving Psyshock here. Honestly, the defense boost on the Zamazenta means that before you could hit it really hard with a Psychic. Now it's like you're really, really struggling for damage into the Zamazenta, especially with the special attack lowering of the Vessel of Ruin active on the board.
Absolutely. I mean, it definitely is pretty rough. I think honestly too, another big thing, right? I like I think this is for Calyrex Shadow teams really important. Like, how do you deal with Zama Pao, right? It definitely feels like a lot of the approach is kind of focused on that like Clefairy maybe giving you some support. Um, but it's tricky, right? I mean, I think also too, you kind of mentioned like hinted at that Ting Lu and Dondozo. It's just a huge problem. Not to mention Fissure can get thrown out a lot versus this team because of how slow it looks in general. Especially too with trying to set up. You have Unaware as well, so you're not worried about that +2 Astral Barrage. Like, there's a lot of resistance for sure coming from the side. And it is worth noting as well, the names are flipped, so it is going to be Healer Bear or Geo on the top side using the Zambazenta team, and then Suya using the Calyrex Shadow team. But with that being said, let's get into the match maybe and see how both players opt to approach this.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if Dondozo actually ends up coming here. I don't expect to with the presence of Rillaboom and the Raging Bolt. And honestly, Yawn, Wave Crash, Fisher doesn't gain you that much ground consistently. One thing I love about this team is that Zamazenta is kind of a Pokemon that I know it as something that will 2-hit KO pretty much everything in the metagame if it does not resist it. Sometimes even if it does resist it with Chin-Pao in the field. And of course, Tinglu is the Pokemon in the metagame that can consistently just trade 50% on pretty much 2 Pokemon in a match consistently with Ruination. So the synergy is really excellent there. And on Suya's side, it's just a pretty bulky team overall. High HP stats, so just being able to lower everything by 50% to allow the Zamazenta Chin-Pao to clean up later is definitely going to be an interesting approach. Hopefully we see it. I'm hoping to, but yeah, going to the last second on Polar Bear's side, trying to figure out what we're going for. It's going to be the Raging Bolt, Tinglu, Dondozo actually is going to come out, and the Zamazenta, maybe prioritizing the unaware ability on the Dondozo to be able to, weather a setup sweep from the Calyrex Shadow Rider if it is able to get that off.
Yeah, I'm not too sure how I feel about Raging Bolt with Tinglu in the lead. Typically, Raging Bolt is usually something if keep in the back, just so that you can go for those late game thunderclaps after Tinglu has been removed and gotten chip on everything. But leading them together, definitely an interesting choice because you are going to be immediately pressure or like reducing your own pressure with Thunderbolt, right? So that's definitely something you'd have to keep in mind. And we are going to see the Calyrex Shadow come out here in the lead. So there's like good and bad things with this lead. I think from Suya's position, right? Like at the very least, this does give you the opportunity to start getting up those nasty plots as quickly as possible, especially since you have that fake out immediately. The only thing you'd have to be careful for is maybe something like a Ruination going in the Calyrex, something like a Taunt going into the Calyrex, so maybe you can't opt to go for something like a Protect. But there's definitely like a lot of good tools here to at least give yourself a decent enough turn one to maybe get up that nasty plot, pull ahead a little bit, and see where you can go from there.
Yeah, it's an interesting Raging Bolt set too. It's not Thunderbolt. It's actually Electroweb in that typical slot. So you do have the option to slow things down to allow your Zamazenta to be able to handle that a little bit better later. But as you said, the Ruination on the Tinglu definitely going to be an option to chip down the Calyrex and make things easier for the rest of the team in the late game. We see a fake out into the Raging Bolt, stopping it from going for any moves this turn, and a nasty plot from the Calyrex. Fully set up, but instead of going for a Ruination for immediate damage, going for the overtime damage and trapping the Incineroar in. I believe it is Parting Shot, so that won't be a permanent trap if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on the mechanics there, but yeah, wondering why there wasn't a option to go for Ruination there.
Yeah, I mean, a big thing here at the very least is maybe so Incineroar can't hard switch. We are just going to see the Calyrex opt for a pass here. I mean, this is a pretty safe situation, right? You're able to just kind of take the Electroweb, but if Taunt comes out here and catches the Incineroar, Incineroar will be able to switch, but Electroweb actually missing it. So now Incineroar able to get that parting shot off. Had Electroweb come out and connected on that Incineroar and Taunt come out on Incineroar, it would have been able to block that parting shot play, but now just being completely able to, just reduce the Raging Bolt's damage, now get in another fake out potentially from the opposing Rillaboom, or maybe with redirection. Clefairy coming in here, but we are going to see the Taunt come out here, catching it, so maybe having the switch immediately, but definitely that Electroweb and Taunt would have been a phenomenal turn had it gotten off.
Absolutely. Not only would the Electroweb damage from the Booster Energy Raging Bolt done a lot, and ultimately probably done more than the Ruination would have done on the first turn, so explaining that first turn, like you said, Taunt would have completely stopped the switch, forced the Incineroar to stay on the field, and then next turn the Calyrex is very susceptible to a Thunderbolt or Electroweb plus Ruination to really limit its effectiveness in the late game. Now we have the Clefairy on the field, taunted with no attacking moves. It's pretty much going to be forced to switch unless it wants to struggle. And the Calyrex is, although nasty plotted up with a spell tag active, not really threatening a knockout to the Raging Bolt. It will do a lot of damage with Astral Barrage or Psychic, but the Tinglu extremely happy with this position here as we see a switch out from the Clefairy.
Yeah, the one thing you have to be a little bit careful of is just that Astral Barrage coming out and getting a bunch of damage. It's not going to be able to knock out that Raging Bolt, but it will be getting quite a bit of decent damage down. We are going to see Astral Barrage start to come out here, starting to put the opposing team through the Astral Barrage blender.
Ooh.
Not doing that much of Tinglu, but doing quite a significant chunk to the Raging Bolt. Raging Bolt, though, able to get that Electroweb off, which is going to be slowing down this Calyrex, starting to kind of weaken it a little bit. And Ruination getting a decent amount of chip into this, right? So definitely not any, damage to slouch at or like not worry about. And at this point, right, you could maybe even consider something like a Thunderclap and a Sand Tomb to put that Calyrex in a range where it potentially gets knocked out, or at the very least is super low in range of Behemoth Bash no matter what.
Yeah, Thunderclap, Sandtomb definitely would have knocked out at this point. Obviously, you have to let your Raging Bolt go down, but the fake up pressure from the Incineroar might make that, less straightforward than you would want ideally. We're going to see Polar Bear contemplating switching out to the Dondozo and potentially going for something like a taunt on the Tinglu into the taunt from the Tinglu into the Incineroar slot. We do end up seeing that switch go through, and we'll see who ends up getting faked out. If it goes into the Tinglu and we see an Astral Barrage follow up, which we do see the fake out, disallowing that taunt while exchanging a bit of damage on the Rocky Helmet, we're going to see a huge Astral Barrage come out, and Dondozo, Vessel of Ruin or not, is not going to love taking that hit. Actually, I'm completely wrong, unaware, of course, stopping a lot of that damage from coming out, but still taking about a third of its HP away.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's definitely like, obviously way better been considering it's +2. That unaware really helping it to be able to survive chip, or like survive that chip, and also now being able to pressure that wave crash into the Calyrex here. Another thing you have to be a little bit careful of. That being said, though, this Calyrex is starting to build up lots and lots of damage, and we have to remember too there are other Pokemon in the back, right? So we know it's Clefairy in the back. It's likely probably Urshifu as that last slot, and with the Raging Bolt being so low here, with the Tinglu being low, and then eventually maybe Dondozo taking a bit more chip, there could definitely be a situation in which Urshifu is able to clean up the game pretty comfortably here. So that's definitely something you have to be a bit aware of. But we are going to see that wave crash being locked into that Calyrex, and we are going to see a taunt come out here, potentially trying to catch a switch. We are going to see a protect again, just kind of opting to conserve and play a bit slower on Calyrex, maybe just wanting to get that perfect position. But taunt is going into the Incineroar here.
Yep, taunt coming up. Could see a knockout from the Incineroar. We do see the knockoff into the Dondozo, so making sure that in future turns it's not going to be able to heal anything from the leftovers. We see Wave Crash into the Calyrex Shadow Rider. The chip on the Dondozo, it's going to be close. I wonder, well, actually, it probably shouldn't knock out with an Astral Barrage knockoff, but truthfully, knockoff plus Astral into the Tinglu will knock out. Incineroar could obviously switch out, just say, okay, knockoff's not super high value here. I might just want to get off the field and protect my Calyrex, maybe live a Wave Crash with the presence of Friend Guard from a Clefairy coming in, but yeah, going to depend on how the Dondozo is trained in that regard. We see Polar Bear contemplating the switch out to the Raging Bolt, likely just going to be taking a sack here to preserve the Tinglu for later in the battle, but yeah, definitely not a lot of offensive pressure being offered in these later turns from Polar Bear, but now the Dondozo potentially has a chance to finally take a knockout into this Calyrex if it is trained strong enough to knock it out, but
the concern here though would be with Clefairy coming in, if Calyrex is able to live that if it's able to live that wave crash, that would be really bad here. We are going to see the Astral Barrage come out here. It's going to take out the Raging Bolt. It is going to get Dondozo very low. Even if Dondozo is able to get the knockout, it will knock itself out as well, which I think is a huge deal. But if Calyrex is able to survive here, that would be absolutely devastating here. We are going to actually see the Yawn go into the Calyrex here, which is a okay trade. The only problem with this is now you have the option of potentially Incineroar coming in for the Calyrex and just going for something like a Follow Me. And at that point, you're going to be able to reset your Calyrex and get it in where it can just start Astral Barraging to clean up the rest of the Pokemon, right? Dondozo doesn't have leftovers, so it's not able to sit there safely. Tinglu is super low in the fact where it's in range of like 2 Astrals for sure. And then Zama, if it's forced to Wide Guard, that's not really doing much. And it doesn't have that much HP, so it's probably going to be taking a lot from Astral Barrage if it's not Wide Guarding.
yeah, going to be bringing in the Zamazenta, which can at least threaten the Clefairy with a Behemoth Bash or an Incineroar switch in with a Body Press if you expect the Clefairy to go for a Protect or something like that. But as you said, the Dondozo is just locked at 30 HP, no leftovers anymore, so it's going to be really hard for it to stick around against any offensive Pokemon in the team, whether it be even Incineroar at this point, might get it with a knockoff. But yeah, we're going to see, I think that was a Fisher lock, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, no.
And we're going to see potentially a Body Press into the Calyrex, like I said, expecting the Incineroar to come in. Yeah, you can get around a lot of this volatility, really just guarantee the, not guarantee because Fisher's coming out, but maybe get a bit more consistent of a result out of this turn that doesn't go down to prediction if you just go for Follow Me on Clefairy. We'll see what Suya ends up going for here.
Let's see, if Follow Me comes out here, it is going to be a little closer, but we are going to see Protect come out here. So making a good play, right? Able to get that Body Press knockout in Incineroar. The issue is now you have a Calyrex coming in at about middle HP with, the pressure of Astral Barrage or Psyshock into the Dondozo and redirection and Follow Me, right? So definitely feels like it's going to be a little bit rough to stop here. I feel like for sure the Calyrex was allowed to kind of get a little bit out of control here. So if you're on, Peeler Bear side or on Geo side, you probably want to be thinking, okay, maybe going into this next game, like how do I not allow the Calyrex Shadow get going? Because to be honest, it did kind of feel like it was able to execute its standard fake out nasty plot, protect, parting shot, plan, and kind of do what it wanted to. That being said, though, that taunt earlier that ended up, not being able to block the parting shot early game with that Electro Web, like that was definitely a really big momentum swing for sure, and could have made a huge difference later in the set.
For sure. To Geo's credit, usually once you hit the Sand Tomb, you feel a bit safer. That's the more inaccurate of the Sand Tomb Electroweb taunt combo. But yeah, got unlucky on the Electroweb miss. But yeah, now we have the Calyrex on the field, once again threatening Astro Barrages. Of course, you could go for a wide guard, but at that point, you're not really gaining a lot of momentum. Psyshot could just come out into the Dondozo and knock that out. But of course, there's the opportunity for the Tinglu as a dark type to switch on that. So lots of defensive plays that Geo can make here, but none really drive the game forward significantly, and the Calyrex is really just favored in a lot of these interactions. We see the Follow Me, no wide guard coming out from this turn, and looks like a Psyshock correctly called into the Tinglu slot by Polar Bear, switching in the Tinglu, taking that perfectly, and then Behemoth Bash doing, oh, that's rough. Less than 50% to the Clefairy. It's going to be really hard to break through this combination on Geo's side.
I guess the question would be is if you Behemoth Bash and Sand Tomb again, and Clefairy opts to go for that Follow Me, would you be able to get the knockout potentially in that situation, right? Because if you are, then it's still playable from there because something like a wide guard can come out to protect Ting Lu. Ting Lu has no way to be able to get knocked out, and then it's able to get a Sand Tomb into that Calyrex later. It definitely feels like here the biggest part of this game will be preserving the Ting Lu. The fact that Tinglu can't be hit by the Calyrex with that wide guard when you have wide guard available and can only get hit by like single target moves, but then its only single target move is a psychic type move. That's definitely something it can exploit. But we're going to see the helping hand come out here. It is going to be an Astral Burst. It probably won't be able to knock out this Tinglu, but it is going to get a significant amount of damage, and it is able to just live on that 5%. With Zama taking a bunch of chip as well, we're going to see Behemoth Bash go into the Calyrex. Is it going to be a Sand Tomb coming out here? Yes, it is. And it's going to be getting down the Calyrex, but it looks like it's going to be able to survive with just a little bit of HP from the Quicksand.
Yeah, extremely narrow margins here. At this point, yeah, the Calyrex is going to be knocked out by Sand Tomb at this point. You can just double protect if you want to. I don't know my Sand Tomb mechanics especially well. I don't know if ghost types are allowed to switch out of this form of trapping, but the Clefairy, okay, yeah. So most likely going to see a switch unless you just go on the offensive and say, okay, Geo can't afford to let me switch here, so I'm just going to double attack and take a double knockout. Got last turn correctly on the wide guard call. Nearly took 2 knockouts, just fell short on the Tinglu, and if you get that knockout, you probably just win. But yeah, at this point, you might just allow the Calyrex to go down. We, of course, haven't seen Suyu's last Pokemon. If it's the Urshifu, you could definitely just protect with the Clefairy and try and sweep the rest of your Pokemon, rest of Geo's Pokemon, which are in Surging Strike's range. But no, we do just see the Astral Barrage come out, say no double protect. I think you think that I'm going to switch out and not let my Calyrex go down, but yeah, not the case. Gets 2 consecutive wide guard Astral Barrage, calls completely correct, and now takes the double knockout.
Yeah, now obviously not being knocked out as well. I mean, realistically, I think it was pretty hard for Geo, right? Like, even if you make the read there, I mean, the best play you could probably go for is go for something like a wide guard and a taunt into the Clefairy. That would be able to stop it from moving or like doing anything useful once the Calyrex goes down from Sandstorm. But in this situation, right, Calyrex just kind of going for that Astral Barrage, saying, hey, if you don't wide guard me, like I will keep you honest and you will lose the game. And Geo not really keeping it honest there, which means that, obviously the Astral Barrage was able to come out and get that double knockout.
Yeah, just looking at the team matchup in general, these Tinglu Dondozo strategies tend to excel at just slowing the pace of the game down against kind of faster paced teams and making them play at a tempo that they're uncomfortable with. It's not really a problem for the Calyrex Shadow Rider, really bulky, nasty plot teams where you are very comfortable playing 10 plus turn games with just switching out, faking out, follow me, protect, etc., and playing as safe as a game as you can. So kind of not quite a style counter Of course, you do have multiple dark types to be able to stifle that offense of the Calyrex Shadow Rider, but you do have to keep in mind while you're protecting your Pokemon, you're not actively doing damage, and when you don't have Sand Tomb or Ruinations coming out consistently, that can catch up to you, which seemed to be the case that first game.
The question would be going into this game too, right? Like maybe, do you want to drop that Raging Bolt in the lead and go for something that could maybe be more proactive, right? It definitely felt like there was a bit of counter synergy between that Raging Bolt and Ting-Lu, besides the fact of that Electro Web and Taunt after that turn one. But you can't really repeat that turn, right? And have it have the same impact of maybe being unexpected. So I definitely think that we're going to have to see maybe some adjustments come out here from Geo's side.
Yeah, I think the Dondozo was definitely effective at tanking the fully set up Calyrex Shadow Rider and forcing a switch with the Yawn. I wonder if you maybe try and go for that a little bit earlier, given that we saw in Incineroar plus Calyrex Shadow Rider lead. Maybe you just go full send on the defensive options, or maybe you go a bit more offensive, bring the Qianpao in and force terrestrialization, or maybe take advantage of the fact that you're very likely to see a lot of fake out and Clefairy switches once you have the more offensive duos of the Zamazenta and Qianpao active. Maybe go a bit more aggressive as a switch up this game. Interested to see what Geo ends up selecting, and down a game in a pretty grindy matchup can be very daunting mentally. You know that if you commit to the defensive strategy again, you're going to tire yourself out in the game 2, and then game 3 you have to do it all over again potentially. So yeah, going to be interesting how Geo decides to play the rest of this game and the set.
I think a big thing here too will be how are you able to navigate around that shadows, right? Like I think having the wide guard as well, and maybe also just getting the Zama sooner. I also would really like to see Pow here. I feel like Pow could have been really useful just to be able to get some good chip next to that Zamazenta, but that's something it seems like as if maybe Geo thinks that there are better routes here. Maybe wanting to lean into that Raging Bolt again, right? Valuing that Electro Web. But
yeah, we do see a
definitely not the
follow-up.
most ideal.
Oh, sorry, you were cutting out for me.
No, you're all good. Definitely not the most ideal. So
yeah, we see as same game 1, we're going to see the Raging Bolt and the Ting-Lu come out with the Dondozo and the Zamazenta in the back. Maybe Polar Bear just expecting, all right, if I don't get a little unlucky on my accuracy, maybe I can. The damage that I get in the Incineroar that turn and the really limited positioning options my opponent has, that might be the margins that I need to just win the game from there. But we do see a switch up in leads from Suyu. We see the Rillaboom plus the Calyrex Shadow Rider going for a bit more offensive options immediately into the Ting-Lu, with a Woodhammer immediately being able to threaten. Probably not quite a knockout. Maybe I'm not entirely familiar with Ting-Lu's game in terms of tanking Woodhammers. It probably can if it's EV defensively enough. But you'll also exchange a lot of recoil plus Rocky Helmet on that.
It'd probably be able to live without the Astral Barrage if there's like a Astral on it. I think Astral plus Woodhammer would be able to get the knockout on it. I think a big thing here that matters as well, right? Okay, so you're obviously putting yourself in a position where you can sort of fake out a nasty plot turn 1, and you're going to be offsetting the chip of Sand Tomb pretty much with that grassy terrain, at least for the most part. So there's going to be a lot of like good opportunities there for sure. Now, overall, you also have to be really careful because fake out going into that Raging Bolt, right, is just going to prevent it from really getting any damage down. That being said, if you are able to get a high value Ruination, you are going to be able to get a bunch of chip into this Calyrex and kind of start lowering it a little bit, maybe getting into range of a Terra Electric Thunderclap, right? So that's definitely something that has to be respected. Definitely going into this next turn, a big thing is going to be how do you play with the Calyrex? How do you play with the Raging Bolt, right? Maybe if you're expecting something like a Calyrex to just attack, right, you could go for something like a Thunderclap and a Sand Tomb, right? Or you could just opt to go for a more safer Electro Web plus like target, right? Or Electro Web plus protect. You definitely have to be very careful here, though, if you are on Killer Bear's side, because you don't necessarily want to just be losing your Ting-Lu for free to Woodhammer.
Yeah, it's definitely a big call. Based on the first game, Suyu was playing extraordinarily safe with the Calyrex in the early game and then kind of cranked the gas up a little bit later. If they decide to just go more offensive this turn, don't go for Protect, it could be something that Geo has to call out. But yeah, we do see the Protect from the Calyrex and potentially a Woodhammer into the Raging Bolt, maybe expecting the Dondozo to switch in or just wants the big damage to put it in range of an Astral Barrage next turn. But we see a Draco Meteor failing into the Protect on the Calyrex, and the Tinglu following up with a Taunt into the Rillaboom, maybe expecting a U-turn out into Clefairy or Incineroar or another Pokemon, but yeah, given it's an Assault Vest Rillaboom that turn, that Taunt being pretty much entirely wasted that turn. So really excellent call from Suyu, and now Polar Bear back to the drawing board, and weakened a little bit on the Raging Bolt to the point there where it might just fall to an Astral Barrage next turn.
That's one of the main issues, right? Is the fact that now the Raging Bolt potentially could go down. Not to mention, you could also just throw another double up into it, right? Or potentially just opting to maybe. I mean, yeah, there's a couple different ways you could go about it for sure. It definitely feels like the Calyrex is has the advantage here in terms of pressure.
Yeah, definitely on the back foot for Geo here. Going to be switching the Dondozo out with the Unaware ability, and the Vessel of Ruin active going to be tanking Astral Barrages. Not well, but, you know, with leftovers and Grassy Terrain taking them over time decently, we see that Astral Barrage come out. Going to be doing a big chunk of damage, and I think the real question here is the targeting on the Wood Hammer. Last turn covered the Raging Bolt, potentially switching out with it into that slot. This time we're going to see, oh, U-turn, deciding not to go for that. Just wants a bit of chip into the Raging Bolt, expecting it to stay in, maybe barely live the attack. But no, Wood Hammer does not come out. We're going to see the U-turn. And yeah, in comes the Clefairy. So now protecting the Calyrex extraordinarily well. You can offer a Helping Hand to now knock out the Dondozo, I believe. It actually would probably live after the leftovers and the Grassy Terrain healing. But yeah, still not going to be able to deal an immediate knockout to the Calyrex with the presence of the Follow Me on the board, really limiting any damage coming into that slot.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Clefairy being able to also redirect like any potential like silly moves like Fissure, right? That being said, the one thing that you'd have to be a little bit careful of is like maybe getting trapped with the Sand Tomb Yawn, right? Being put in a really awkward spot where now your Clefairy's not really doing much. But that being said, Calyrex is just very, very safe to just keep clicking Astral Brush here. And that kind of just feels like all you need to do if you're coming from Suyu's side, right? Which is basically, I'm going to be getting up that nasty plot. I'm going to be getting a bunch of Astral Barrages. What are you going to do about it? And it definitely feels like Geo is having trouble stopping that right now.
Yep, finally getting at least a somewhat favorable turn with the Yawn Sand Tomb. Yeah, there's only Helping Hand, Follow Me, Protect after you. You could go for Helping Hand, but that's kind of mitigated by a fairly safe Devil Protect next turn to just mitigate Follow Me, redirecting attacks once again. And you also heal your Pokemon especially well. Calyrex continually healing with the leftovers is definitely annoying. We see the turn 1 Ruination over time has become less and less effective. I think it's back up to like 75% of its HP. So yeah, effectively out of range of the damage from the Zamazenta in the back, as well as the Raging Bolt no longer in range of, Electroweb into Thunderclap. And I'd imagine it's still living a Draco, but yeah, going to see a more offensive turn. Dondozo going for Protect as the Tinglu still goes on the offensive this turn. We see Follow Me coming out from the Clefairy. As we, see once again a nasty plot from the Calyrex saying, okay, Dondozo is obviously protecting here. It's so safe from them. There's no way they're going to prioritize the Wave Crash damage into my Clefairy. We see the Ruination redirect from the Calyrex. We saw the targeting that previous turn into the Clefairy, so now maybe in range of a Wave Crash. Not that it is, you could clear off the Friend Guard with that. After the Sand Tomb hits this turn, maybe you can knock it out. But yeah, now the Calyrex up to +4, the damage into the Tinglu is going to start stacking up even faster.
I mean, it is worth noting too that with that Sand Tomb trapping, maybe being able to get that taunt earlier would have been nice, but it's kind of hard because, obviously Calyrex was just kind of allowed to sit there, right? Get up its nasty plots, and now it's like extra scary, right? Not to mention the fact that you could also just opt to go for something like a Protect, switch in that Rillaboom, then you get Fake Out Astral again. Super hard to deal with, right? So it definitely feels like Calyrex is kind of controlling all the momentum in this matchup, and even though Tinglu and Dondozo can sit well in front of it, it's starting to get into position now where maybe they can get overwhelmed.
Yeah, I haven't been tracking incredibly well how long the Sand Tomb will last. I don't know if Clefairy is still locked in this turn and the next, but yeah, the Calyrex can threaten lots of damage, not a knockout into the Dondozo, but I guess the healing is gone on the Calyrex at that point with Rillaboom being off the field or the Grassy Terrain being off the field. That's the one advantage, but as you said, we do see the Calyrex play it safe here and go for the Protect as the Dondozo, Clefairy taking its first turn of sleep, and Dondozo and Tinglu trying to make some headway in this battle. With the Ruination coming into the Calyrex, and of course the Dondozo following up with the Yawn into the Calyrex as well. So pretty
I
dead
think
turn there.
I think it is worth noting too that by spending these turns going for protect, you are giving yourself the opportunity of waking up going for that follow me. The only thing is that there is going to be a pretty significant pressure coming out from the like Calyrex. I mean, at this point, right? Like, of course, the Dondozo Tinglu are pretty bulky. They're able to sit in front of some attacks. But if this Calyrex is able to, get next to something like a Rillaboom, it'll be really hard to stop.
Yeah, for sure. I think at this point you do finally have the position that you've been gunning for this entire set. Lockdown left slot, and then the Calyrex just finally susceptible to some big damage and sleep. You could, I guess, yeah, Sand Tomb Yawn not going to work. As you said, the Ghost type's able to switch out of that lock, but now finally able to pressure some significant damage. Not a knockout because of Friend Guard being on the field, so Ruination Wave Crash won't knock out, but at least you can put the Pokemon to sleep. But we finally see that Astro Barrage at +4 damage into Tinglu, and it is pretty disgusting, dealing now a clean 2-shot and then the Yawn following up on the Calyrex. So you could go for a double protect, but yeah, just this damage consistently into the Tinglu over time. The Pokemon conventionally that's supposed to be your Calyrex answer has, just been whittled down to a point where it's no longer a reasonable check.
Yeah, I think a big thing here too is that Yawn being allowed to connect on the Calyrex, right? Like now it pretty much puts Calyrex in a position where it has to, either accept that sleep or it's going to switch out, which then means it loses all of its boosts. So definitely probably the best possible outcome you can get if you're on Geo side. That being said, you aren't really clear yet because there's a couple different ways that this can still go poorly for you, right? The nice thing is you are able to get that switch into the maybe Rillaboom, so you could get up grassy terrain and go for that fake out Astral next turn, but also then you're helping the Dondozo recover, so maybe that's not the greatest, right? It definitely feels like there were some opportunities maybe for Calyrex to have safer plays, maybe bring in Rillaboom instead, do some other stuff, but you are just going to see Rillaboom likely come out here for a different Pokemon. We'll see what comes out. We're going to see the Urshifu come out here, actually. Hasn't been revealed yet, so that's going to be able to put on quite a bit of pressure, even and especially to calling out the Protect on the Tinglu, now being able to potentially threaten that Surging Strikes in the Tinglu next turn.
Really good Yawn from Dondozo, expecting the Calyrex to switch out, saying, okay, I can at worst take an Astro Barrage on my Dondozo and protect with my Tinglu. End up low on Dondozo, but at least guarantee that that slot is either asleep or you will be put to sleep in future turns. But the Urshifu comes in, now threatening a lot of damage into the Tinglu and anything in the back with a close combat, or just a supplemental damage you would need to knock out the Dondozo with an Astro Barrage. But yeah, now at least has to make the choice between falling asleep and taking that damage. But we see Rillaboom in, buying a bit more time for Suya to potentially switch out that Urshifu with a fake out, or just Wood Hammers for knockouts into either of the slots if they don't go for a protect or terrestrialization.
I mean, there's definitely like so much pressure coming out here, right? You have the Surging Strikes going into Tinglu, you have the Wood Hammer going into the Dondozo, you could have close combat going to Dondozo and Wood Hammer. There definitely seems like a lot of good options here, not to mention the fact that, Rillaboom can also just opt to go for a U-turn if it ends up getting yawns, so obviously giving it a lot of flexibility to kind of deal with the current board state. That being said, though, there is a fresh Zamazenta in the back, which is going to be able to put on a lot of pressure. Not to mention a Raging Bull that can still go for some attacks that can be pretty high impact. So it's definitely going to be, I think, these next few turns and how quickly the Dondozo and Tinglu are removed. It's going to be very, very impactful on the end of this game.
Yep, seeing a double attack. For the first time in a while, usually it's been a support plus an attack on Geo side, but finally going on the offensive. Knows that the Urshifu is threatened. It's a key piece in this matchup potentially to break through a lot of the Pokemon on his side, so goes for a Wave Crash and Ruination, I think it was, or maybe Sand Tomb, into the Calyrex Shadow Rider. We see Fake Out come out from the Rillaboom, nullifying that potential Wave Crash, and Ruination does chip down that Calyrex Shadow Rider. Now, even after a couple turns of leftovers, probably will be in range of the Behemoth Bash of the Zamazenta in the later parts of the game. But yeah, now, because there was no Yawn that came out, we do just have a pretty, it's not safe. Of course, the Dondozo still will live in Astro Barrage, and you kind of have to pick your targeting a bit with the Rillaboom, but definitely still a strong offensive position for Suya. Just has to make a, get a few calls right to make sure that you're not sacrificing too many resources to take these knockouts on the Dondozo and Tinglu to get to the Zamazenta, to where it can sweep you in the late game.
Definitely feel like if you're RTU, you're like fine with the, obviously what you've been able to accomplish with the damage. I'd say the only thing you have to be careful of, as you kind of mentioned, right? Like, where does your target go into? Making sure stuff isn't a lot, kind of get rid of that Calyrex. Not to mention, you also will have to respect Thunderclap at some point as well. That being said, though, it does feel like, for CSR, it's a lot more options here. You have to make sure not to make detrimental mistakes. So,
Finally seeing a terrestrialization come out from one of the sides. It's going to be the Terra Bug Dondozo, so will now be resisting the grass type moves from the Rillaboom, so maybe was expecting an Astro Barrage Woodhammer combination. Still going to be tight, but I imagine at this point should live. We see the Astro Barrage is going to come out, going to deal a fair amount to the Tinglu and Dondozo, putting them both very low. We're going to see if Woodhammer is connecting the Dondozo. It does, and it still knocks out despite going for the
gets a knockout.
Terastallization.
Yeah.
So completely wasted that resource. You could have maybe used the Terra Dragon later in the game to be able to handle the Surging Strikes, or at least force it to go for close combats into you. And yeah, now no longer an option. Going to be taking over 50% from those CCs later. Might not come down to it, but yeah, the Ruination comes onto the Rillaboom, dealing a significant amount of damage though. So not a completely wasted turn. Of course, you were either going to get an attack off with Dondozo or Tinglu there. So at least taking the Ruination and now putting the Rillaboom in range for the Body Press, and the Zamazenta's Behemoth Bash now threatening a knockout into the Calyrex. So did completely waste the Terra there, no missing words, but at this point might have the damage he needs to still be fine in the late game here.
Yeah, I think a big deal too is like, are you going to be able to dispatch the Calyrex in time, right? So maybe if there's a here and something like Woodhammer goes into rid of it, right? Then we're going to see Grassy Glide comes out here. That is a really big deal because it does mean full power barrage is going to be coming out here, and it could potentially get a bunch of damage into the Zama. We are going to see the Astral Barrage comes out here. How much damage is this going to be doing? Also, is it going to put Urshifu in a position where it could win the game anyways is a big question. And Astral Barrage getting it down into the yellow range, it likely is going to be a knockout here in return, but it's kind of tricky, right? I mean, Raging Bolt obviously is in such a good spot versus Urshifu. So does Urshifu really have enough in the tank to be able to win here? Especially with the fact that Body Press can just come out here and Rillaboom.
I don't recall if the Urshifu, it is a Focus Sash Urshifu, Terra Stellar, and I don't believe Suyu has used the Terastallization. Unfortunately, no defensive Terra against the Thunderclap, but it does have the Focus Sash active regardless. Yeah, we see the Raging Bolt come in a little bit low on HP, but still should be out of range of a single attack from Rillaboom and Urshifu. Maybe a close combat Woodhammer. I mean, imagine that would knock out, but yeah, just finding a way to deal with this Urshifu is definitely going to be Polar Bear's main obstacle there. With a Focus Sash, it means you have to double into it to KO, and with Rillaboom not really threatening knockouts into either Pokemon here, maybe a Woodhammer into Grassy Glide Aqua Jet next turn could do it. But yeah, dealing with this Raging Bolt and Zamazenta combo is definitely going to be a problem for dealing with the Urshifu with Focus Sash is going to be the main challenge on Geo's side here.
I think it's definitely interesting because when we saw that barrage come out, at first you'd be like, oh, okay, just trying to get damage, but kind of was almost like a I'm giving up play, right? Maybe being able to switch out, conserve the barrage for later could have been a bit better. But we are going to see the Terastallization come out here. That Stellar Terra is pretty threatening, and if the Thunderclap didn't come out here and you're able to get a knockout into the, opposing, Raging Bolt, it might actually be okay. But we are just going to see Thunderclap immediately come out here, bring it down the Sash, and that does mean that Zama is going to be able to get rid of this Rillaboom pretty comfortably if it decides to go for Body Press into it, which it does. And now, realistically, it's all about this these final two Pokemon. Because we likely are going to see Surging Strikes go into that Zamazenta here, right? But the thing is that I don't know if there's enough in the tank for Urshifu to actually win this. Not to mention that you have to get around Thunderclap.
Yeah, I guess there's a world where I'm not entirely certain of the training on this Raging Bolt, but maybe you live a Terra Stellar. I mean, you should live a Terra Stellar close combat, I imagine, at this point. So it's just like you could go for the crit close combat, dodge Thunderclap, or just go for a bunch of Aqua Jets until you win the mind game and go for a close combat. But yeah, Polar Bear just going for the instant Thunderclap, not messing around with that, and sends us to a game 3 after what could have been a potentially tricky spot if he gets the Thunderclap calls wrong, but just pins the Urshifu down, knocks out the Rillaboom, and goes from there. So honestly, reasonably safe as long as the combination of Terra Stellar, Aqua Jet, and Grassy Glide can't knock out your Zamazenta, which it probably can't. Thunderclap Body Press does seem pretty safe there, but yeah, just makes a correct decision, finds the right path to get out of a tricky matchup, and takes it to a game 3.
Yeah, these matchups are always like slugfest, right? Because basically it's just how do I slowly gain enough margins where I'm able to win. Dozo and Tinglu. And then the other team was like, okay, can I get enough chip with my Astral Barrages to be able to get through the game like later? And it felt like for sure the Zamazenta in the back was able to put on a ton of pressure here, especially with the Volt. So maybe something to be considerate of is, okay, if I'm going to be getting up this nasty plot on this Rex, and that's going to be a main form of success, what if maybe I run like Incineroar and Rillaboom so I could go for double fake out and consistently cycle, right? Definitely feels like there needs to be a little bit more coming out here to support the Cali, right? Overall, felt pretty okay, but maybe needing another form of fake out just to be able to stall turns and get another free nasty plot off.
Yeah, I think the Rillaboom choice is definitely a double-edged sword. Of course, you can basically get around the damage that you're taking consistently from Sand Tomb, Ruination with the grassy terrain just healing your Calyrex up. Of course, that ended up really being a problem against the Tinglu and the Dondozo once they got on the field, because the double leftovers and grassy terrain made the Dondozo with Unaware really, really difficult to break through for the Calyrex if you couldn't get the Rillaboom in cleanly, which, to Polar Bear's credit, did an excellent job of trapping the Clefairy on the field with the Sand Tomb plus Yawn and then Taunt combination. I do think there was a key point in that battle where the Dondozo came in on the Rillaboom U-turn instead of the Woodhammer, where if Suyu gets that play and knocks out the Dondozo, it's kind of hard to imagine there's a lot more options to proceed to that battle a little bit more linearly, where you're not having to worry about Yawn forcing you to switch out pretty consistently. So yeah, I do think that's going to be an important factor as we see Polar Bear once again bringing the same four. If you can deal with that Dondozo on switch in a little bit more cleanly so that your Calyrex can sweep faster and not have to deal with the Unaware, that could be a huge way to speed this battle up for CU side.
It's definitely a little bit of a battle of endurance. Like, if it definitely feels like, are you able to mentally like find the small margins that can give you a bit of advantage, right? Like, I mean, these matchups are usually really exhausting to play through just because of how long they take. But we are going to see that Incineroar and Calyrex lead come out again against the Raging Bolt and Tinglu. Both players kind of opting for their kind of safe plays that were safe leads that were able to perform really well, right? Notably here as well, because the Incineroar is here, right? That likely means that you probably have one more supportive tool in the back. I think this time it might end up being that Rillaboom, but of course it depends. That being said, though, right, this will give you the ability to just go for that free nasty plot turn one again, kind of like the previous couple turns.
Yep. So if we see the pathing go exactly the same as the first game, we could see the Sand Tomb Electroweb taunt combo work a little bit better and maybe see what Polar Bear was going for in that first battle, how that plays out towards the later parts of the game, just making sure that Incin is taking a bunch of damage, but we see a fake out from the Incineroar. Early, I think it was fake out initially into the Raging Bolt in the first game, so definitely a switch up there. And then the nasty plot from the Calyrex immediately boosting up, threatening that Raging Bolt later on, but we see the Electroweb connecting on the Incineroar, meaning that it can hard switch, but you can taunt it if it tries to get greedy and go for a parting shot. So Tinglu flinches, takes potentially, it could be important. We've seen the Tinglu living on pretty narrow margins later in the game. That damage could add up if the grassy terrain healing doesn't come later in the battle. But yeah, solid turn from Suyu, getting the nasty plot up, now really threatening that Raging Bolt. But of course, you do have to worry about the Dondozo coming in. You don't have Rillaboom active on the field. You could bring it in, but you do at least have that to take one Astral Barrage for one turn.
Not to mention, Incineroar could also opt to kind of do what it was doing in the previous games, which is go for knockoffs, right? Start getting rid of leftovers. I think in the game one, every second turn was the Dondozo getting knocked off, right? So leftovers couldn't really be used. And it definitely feels like getting rid of those small margins of recovery is good here. But we are going to see a switch likely into something like Rillaboom or Clefairy. We are going to see the Rillaboom come out here, which is going to give access to another fake out, give some healing to the Calyrex, and also pressure an immediate Woodhammer into the Tinglu.
You going for a protect there. Polar Bear did get a bit aggressive with the Raging Bolt. Not that there was an excellent switch in the back, but goes for the Draco Meteor, expecting the Calyrex to try and take some damage, maybe chip down a Dondozo switch in the back. Expecting him to switch, but yeah, goes for Draco, falls deaf onto the protect, and then the taunt goes into the Rillaboom. As mentioned, this assault vest that's effectively useless. So yeah, basically a perfect turn from Suyu, while getting some solid positioning with Woodhammer threatening a knockout in combination with the Astral Barrage, and or just having the fake out option with the Raging Bolt to bring it. Probably not going to knock out as we saw in the first game with Tinglu on the field, but still going to be bringing it pretty close to a Grassy Glide range and Yeah, worst you can take is a Ruination or Sand Tomb on the Calyrex.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention that pin of Woodhammer and Astral is just so strong here.
Mhm.
Kind of puts the Tinglu in a really awkward spot. So we are going to see the Astral Barrage come out here with no Terrestrialization. It is going to be getting a bunch of damage down into the Raging Bolt, getting it super low on health, and Woodhammer going to be following up here. It is going to be able to get a knockout on the Tinglu, so a big difference from the previous games we saw. Normally, Tinglu being able to stick around for quite a few turns, but this was just a huge knockout. That being said, there is a lot of chip here, but that's a huge trade to take. But Draco Meteor going into Calyrex able to barely survive.
Yeah, the grassy terrain healing from the previous turn looked to be the difference maker there. It might have been narrow, but yeah, completely falling out of range of that Draco Meteor. Really excellent call. Could have even knocked out the Raging Bolt if you wanted to, but expected potentially for a switch out there. Just says, all right, I'm tired of this Tinglu, really just consistently making these battles a thorn in my side. Now going to be, proceeding with Astral Barrage at full power for the rest of the battle. Dondozo's still going to be unaware active, but without the Tinglus, Vessel of Ruin active, going to be taking a lot more from those. And with the presence of the Rillaboom on the field, able to go for a U-turn, potentially into another fake out Pokemon so that you can get around the Thunderclap from the Raging Bolt, which might still knock out if you bring Friend Guard on the field, but probably safer to just go for Protect. But yeah, contemplating on Polar Bear's side, trying to figure out how to deal with this frustratingly surviving Calyrex Shadow Rider, and brings in the Zamazenta as his answer.
Not to mention, there are a bunch of different plays you can make here, right? You could just opt to, because it looks like the Rillaboom might just be out of range of Body Press as well. You could opt to go for something like a U-turn into that Raging Bolt and just go for a Protect on Calyrex. Let it get some residual recovery left. You could just opt to go for Astral if you want to play pretty aggressive here. You could also potentially see a Woodhammer coming out into the Raging Bolt as well from the Rillaboom, right? Like maybe not even wanting to U-turn here and covering for a switch. There's just so many different options to consider here. And not to mention that if Astral gets off here for free, that could also be a huge situation. But we are going to see the Calyrex just opt to go for a switch here. It is going to be bringing in that opposing Incineroar that has a little bit of chip on it. Body Press likely, obviously, never going into that slot, which is fine. And now the big question is did Woodhammer go into Raging Bolt? If Woodhammer went into Raging Bolt and is able to catch the Sundozo, that's going to be a lot of chunk damage it's able to.
We see Grassy Glide, so covered the Thunderclap, but not as committed as a Woodhammer to the read, but does end up being the best play given that Rillaboom was going to fall to the Body Press that turn. Only way to get around that maybe would have been a Clefairy switch in. We don't know what's at the fourth Pokemon here. Based on the previous battles, seems like it would be Urshifu, so Clefairy likely benched unless you're just going all out on the Calyrex Shadow Rider offense. But the Dondozo comes in, takes that reasonably well given that you have the leftovers and the Grassy Terrain healing to bring you back up near full HP. But yeah, it is the Urshifu in the back, so yeah, Terrestrialization not used on Suyu's side, so yeah, neither side is actually terrestrialized yet. We have the Terra Stellar option available on the Urshifu, but of course you could go for the Terra Ghost on the Incineroar to dodge a lot of the damage from the Zamazenta and the Dondozo. I imagine that's most likely, or you could just delay that one turn by going for Fake Out and just taking some consistent damage with the Urshifu here.
Yeah, I mean, realistically speaking here, having the Terra option is nice. I would say it's definitely a little bit awkward, right? You didn't want your Calyrex Shadow to be taking as much damage as it did potentially. One thing I'm really interested to see here too that I thought could have been really impactful was, it had Will-O-Wisp decided to come out a bit sooner. Obviously, in this case now, it's not going to make as much difference, but technically you still have that access to Terra Ghost, right, in Will-O-Wisp. So there's a couple different plays that can potentially come out here, but we are going to see the Terra Dragon here defensively just wanting to say, okay, look, if I get hit by a water move, I'm fine. If I get hit by a fighting move, it's neutral. And realistically, the only thing that could really pressure here is that, Terra Ghost and Incineroar, maybe with Will-O-Wisp and the Zamazenta.
Yep. Double Terrestrialization, both players identifying. This is a pretty important turn defensively. They have to make sure that their bases are covered and they're not taking too much damage on this turn. Protect from Zamazenta, so is entirely going for the defensive Terrestrialization to make sure close combat or Surging Strike. He's doing minimal damage, goes for Fake Out into the Dondozo, follows up with a close combat. So smart Terrestrialization from the Zamazenta. Made the most of that turn without risking being Will-O-Wisped. Like if you go Protect, you're not going to take that much damage. A lot of it's going to be healed back from the leftovers with the Terrestrialization, whether they go for Surging Strikes or close combat. And if they go for Will-O-Wisp, there's an option for the Dondozo to yawn the Incineroar and potentially force a switch in future turns. But yeah, we see Now the fake out pressure no longer on the board. Will-O-Wisp is definitely free with the Zamazenta having just protected, but the Urshifu now really struggling to deal meaningful lasting damage with the grassy terrain and leftovers healing both very high physical defense Pokemon consistently. Not for the rest of the battle, of course the Rillaboom is gone, but definitely for the next couple of turns.
Oh my goodness, that did so much damage. Bringing that Urshifu down to its focus sash as well, meaning that that close combat is going to be doing quite a bit of damage into that Dondozo, but looking like it can just easily take that hit, especially with the recovery incoming. What is going to be coming out from the Dondozo here? We are going to see Will-O-Wisp actually ends up whiffing into the Zamazenta here, which is a huge deal. We're going to see Yawn go into Incineroar, so probably the worst possible, actually definitely the worst possible outcome for Chuyu here. But the thing is like it was already pretty difficult because the Urshifu going down to red HP kind of leaves a lot of Pokemon susceptible, especially to that Thunderclap from Molt.
Yeah, the Will-O-Wisp making it a bit harder for the Zamazenta to 1v1 the Urshifu or the Incineroar, but given you already got the damage onto the Urshifu and the Calyrex, I think is low enough that a Behemoth Bash. Now, if it were burned, definitely not, but it would have been able to put it in range of the Thunderclap for the rest of the battle. So, yeah, definitely not an ideal miss. Maybe if that doesn't happen, you can deal with the Raging Bolt with knockoff to allow your Calyrex to sweep in the late game. But yeah, that's just such a difficult miss to stomach at this point in the battle. Completely, basically used your Terra to make sure you could get that off, and now, although it wasn't going to be that valuable, you could have maybe gone for a Stellar Terra to at least to chip the Dondozo in range of something later in the battle. But now the Urshifu is outsped and knocked out easily by any attack, and the Incineroar is forced to sit on the field or take the Yawn, or maybe go for a parting shot. But yeah, once again, not getting a lot of forward momentum if you're forced to parting shot and switch every turn.
So that was a really heads up play from Geo here, just going for a Behemoth Bash into that Urshifu, knowing that it's down in that sash range, which means it's going to be able to get knocked out by anything. And that Behemoth Bash then covering for Calyrex trying to switch into that Body Crest to catch a free, opportunity. Even though Parting Shot is going to, at this point, it does seem like a bit of formalities, right? Zamazenta and Dondozo will definitely be able to clean up this game together, not to mention that there is a Raging Bolt in the back as well. So definitely feels like it was played really well. But it's such a grindy team, right? And you just make like a few margins of error, and it's so difficult when you're using something like the Calyrex Shadow team versus a team like this.
Yeah, I think the Will-O-Wisp, looking at the Calyrex Shadow Rider HP, even if you're intimidated and burned, I still imagine a Behemoth Bash would have knocked out on the switch, so the Will-O-Wisp miss might not have influenced the outcome of the battle that much. But yeah, look, at this point, like you said, it is basically just going through the formalities of ending the game. I think that the Raging Bolt in the back plus the outspeeding Zamazenta on the Yawned Urshifu is always just going to close this game out pretty cleanly. Looking earlier in the battle, yeah, we see a cancellation. Suyu, knowing that the jig is up, just decides to close out the game. It's already been a pretty long one for them, so just ending it there. I think looking back at that game, the Woodhammer under the Ting Lu, although, yeah, it's like, awesome, we got to knock out one of the most important Pokemon in the team. You sacrificed most of the HP under Calyrex, although it didn't
Yeah.
get knocked out. You could have completely stopped that by just Woodhammering the Raging Bolt slot, and maybe you would have been, if you get that turn wrong, in range of a Ruination into Thunderclap across the two returns, but probably not. So, yeah, I think a read that went wrong on maybe a switch in or a defensive play from the Raging Bolt, but Geo making the perfect call there, knowing when to go offensive on a traditionally very defensive, grindy team over the course of the set, realizes, okay, this is my opportunity to really go hard here, make the read, and ends up where he can drive the game to a win from there.
Yep, and it definitely felt like Geo was able to make, good adaptations. But yeah, I mean, that's going to be it for our week 6. Obviously, we had a lot of good games here. For sure, I think that last match was a very grindy one, but I think it's really interesting how every week we always get to look into these like Calyrex Shadow balance teams, kind of see like, okay, like how, like what are these small things that make a difference, right? So for example, like you mentioned Sai Shotgun team preview, right? Like obviously we didn't see the move come out at all, but that's probably because like it wasn't very good there, right? Or also like what's the item, right? Like what's the difference between how spell tags damage impacts the matchup versus like life orb. I think that was all like really interesting parts of the game that are always cool to see. But yeah, definitely, congrats again to Geo and congrats again to all of our players who were able to win on stream. It's definitely cool getting to watch like a bunch of like high level matches.
Yeah, absolutely. Not only are they playing for pride, but honestly, NPA has gotten so competitive in recent years that even if you're a really excellent player, you're fighting for the roster time to be able to continue playing in future weeks by winning or losing. So Yeah, very important to be winning and getting to contribute to your team, but also on a personal level. Feels great to know that you're probably going to get to fight another top player in future weeks. Really high level competition this week, and the players who won can be rewarded in future weeks with even more, and then the players who lost might take a week, sit, figure out what they want to do for the next week, adapt, and come back to winning for their teams in the rest of the year. Because I think everyone on stream this today at least was at this point positive in the tournament, which means that yeah, they're really, really shaking the table, making things work for their teams and allowing them to progress to the playoffs. So, yeah, gonna take a week, adapt, and then move forward from there.
Yep. No, I mean, super great games. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you guys next week and catch you guys next week. And Cedric, it's been a pleasure casting with you. See you guys. Peace.